Welcome to the Shielded by Power live event. My name is Robert Gouveia, and it is great to be with you this evening. Tonight, we aren't just talking about a political scandal. We are talking about the cover-up of the century. You already know parts of the story. Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, CIA, FBI, DOJ, IRS, and a coordinated multi-million-dollar effort to bury the truth, to steal, and to protect a presidency. When the undeniable evidence of the Biden family's foreign influence peddling first surfaced on that laptop that we know so well, the most powerful institutions in this country, from the highest levels of the intelligence community to big tech and the mainstream media, colluded to shield them and label the truth a lie. And they almost got away with it. They almost succeeded in completely erasing a scandal that went straight to the Oval Office. But they didn't count on the people you are going to meet tonight. Over the course of this broadcast, you are going to hear directly from a group of patriots who refused to back down. They fought for the truth, they paid a massive personal price, and they are here tonight continuing to fight for absolute accountability. Before we dive in, let me share with you a roadmap of exactly who and what you are going to see this evening. First, you're going to hear from the actual federal tax investigators who tracked the money, found the evidence, and got attacked for doing it. They are here, sitting right alongside the legal defenders who shielded and fought for them when our own government turned its weapons on its own people. Then we'll talk to the fearless journalist who originally broke the laptop from hell's story and faced the full force of the coordinated CIA and intelligence community smear campaign. After that, we're bringing you the ultimate insider, a former close business partner who sat in the room, heard the speaker phone calls with Joe Biden, and witness the Biden brand being sold overseas. We will also hear from the ground zero hero, the computer repair shop owner who legally found the evidence and risked his entire livelihood to hand it over to the authorities. Next, we'll be joined by the relentless researcher who defied the cover-up to digitize and publish every single page of that hard drive for the world to see, and then got dragged into federal court for his trouble. And finally, we'll dive into the FBI's internal paper trail with an investigator who shows us exactly how this cover-up was engineered from the inside out. Tonight, this isn't just a broadcast, it's a mission to get the truth out to the public. We're relying on you to help us make this project and this truth an overwhelming success. Thank you for joining us in this fight for the truth. We're going to get right to it. We're going to start the broadcast this evening with a powerhouse panel. We've got lined up IRS special agents, Gary Shapley and Joe Ziegler. They put their careers on the line to expose exactly how the DOJ protected the Biden family. Beside them are two attorneys, Tristan Levitt and Jason Foster from Empower Oversight, the legal shield defending these brave whistleblowers from the government retaliation when they were getting a little bit too close to the truth. And we're bringing them on right now to get into the conversation. There's Gary, there's Joe. We've got Tristan and Jason Foster all joining off. Gentlemen, it's great to see you.
Yeah,
I want to start with Tristan tonight, who is here, the president of Empower Oversight. Of course, we know Empower Oversight is dedicated to helping insiders. You guys work constantly to expose government corruption and help those who are. Tristan, will you kick us off by explaining for our audience and the people here this evening what exactly is Shielded by Power, this documentary project? Why is it absolutely critical that the American people understand what's happening in this film and in this project? And maybe that's a good question for Jason, who is the founder of Empower Oversight, who has his mic off at the moment. And so, Jason, maybe unmute, and then we'll hear from you.
Can you hear me now?
We got you loud and clear.
All right. Looks like we're having technical difficulties already. Well, Shielded by Power is a documentary that we've already started filming, working with Fruition Productions. They have already done interviews of some of the people that you're going to meet and see tonight, some familiar faces. The purpose is to show the American people what it takes to blow the whistle, what it takes to do it successfully when you get the right kind of advice and you do it the right way and you do it legally, what kind of impact you can have. And these American heroes that are on here with us, Joe and Gary, showed the world how it's done. We've got when they brought their testimony forward and they were coming before the House Government Reform Committee and the House Judiciary Committee chairman, and the House Ways and Means Committee chairman, they all said these are some of the best whistleblower testimony that they'd ever had. They weren't just telling what they believed or what they thought. They had brought the documents, they had brought the receipts. And it was a very long and difficult journey for them to come forward. They paid a very high price for it while they were going through it. In the end, they were able to get through it, and they were able to come through on the other side and ultimately be promoted to be leaders in their agency, which is something that is unprecedented and has, to my knowledge, has never happened before. And I've been doing whistleblower work for decades. So we want to tell this story to the American people. We want to show future whistleblowers out there, people who are thinking of blowing the whistle, that if you do it the right way and you get the right kind of legal advice, you can actually be successful.
And this was a major moment in American history. I mean, this was something that impacted, in my opinion, the election and, of course, the future of the country. And Gary, you were instrumental in this. Of course, Gary, you were the lead investigator following the money during your investigation into Hunter Biden and the Biden crime family. And I want to understand, at what moment, from your perspective, did it become clear that the DOJ was not actually interested in justice and that they were not going to let you do your job, which is to follow the evidence, if it led to Joe?
Sure. Yeah. So, I was a supervisor in this case and oversaw the case for several years. And Joe Ziegler was actually the lead case agent on there. We both worked hand in hand to bring what we could forward in this case. And really, my red line was a meeting in Delaware on October 7th, 2022, where the even though Merrick Garland and Chris Wray and the rest of the Department of Justice was saying that David Weiss, the U.S. Attorney in Delaware, had full authority to charge, he in this meeting he basically said that he didn't have that authority and that authority rested elsewhere to make those decisions. He also had said that the 2014, 2015 tax years and that were in Washington, D.C. venue weren't going to be charged. He was going to allow the statute of limitations to expire on them. So those were important years because those were the Burisma years, right? So if those were charged and the Burisma income came into this a trial or into some plea agreement, that was likely that it could implicate Joe Biden as well and what he did in Burisma when he was vice president and when Hunter Biden was on the board there. So that was really the point in time when I went from being very skeptical that based on DOJ's previous conduct to the point where I knew that the fix was in and I had to come forward.
And when you did come forward, can you walk us through, what happened and flesh out a little bit the process? So you see this red line come across and you realize something is off. How was that received by the upper levels of the government?
Well, they just protect themselves, right? It's the bureaucracy, and they're protecting themselves, and they knew what the truth was, and it had been over 2 years that Joe and I have been raising issues that we had encountered in the case, from search warrants not being allowed to be conducted to FBI headquarters tipping off Secret Service and the Biden transition team in December of 2020 after the election that we were going to go and talk to Hunter Biden and several witnesses. So it was several years in the making, really, and I was documenting that all along. And Joe Ziegler was really focused on the evidence in the case and trying to move everything forward. So it was a very long process once I decided to blow the whistle. It was first time active investigation like this. During the investigation, with tax privacy information was brought forward in a whistleblower fashion legally. So we basically were creating the framework to come forward legally, and that required us to go through Congress, the House Ways and Means Committee and Chairman Jason Smith. And it was in April of 2023 when we notified Congress that House Ways and Means Committee, the whistleblower, and I was going to come forward. So it was a lot of legal work. It was Mark Lytle, it was Jason Foster, it was Tristan Levitt, and others that helped us create the framework that was the exact right way to do it. It was a long process, and if we had done anything wrong, Joe Ziegler and I probably would have been in handcuffs. So it was a long process, and but it turned out to be what had to be done.
and we're grateful that you did it. And Joe, I want to pick that back up with you. So you guys were on this for a long time. You had been in the government in these positions for a long time. And as you're getting closer and closer, you get sidelined. As Gary was explaining, your careers are now in jeopardy. There's even maybe a possibility of jail. And I wanted to ask about the professional and the personal toll, that this may have taken on you guys as you were coming to this decision. Can you walk us through kind of the repercussions that you guys were facing while you were standing up and speaking about these things?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, this whole blowing the whistle and coming forward in this, it was life-changing. I mean, we're going against an extremely powerful family, the Biden family, who had the Department of Justice at their control, and you had a Department of Justice that was doing everything that they possibly could to shield the American public from knowing what the truth was. And when things kept on happening, enough was enough. And I knew that as what I was brought up with, the values that I was brought up with, the oath to office as a federal law enforcement officer that I put down, that it was my duty and obligation to come forward. And as I've stated in multiple avenues, I was a Democrat. I was one that voted for a lot of the people that are on the other side of the aisle. But at the end of the day, this was not a Democrat or Republican issue. This was not a left or right issue. This was an issue of what is right and what is wrong. And you had very, very powerful people who were not elected officials, who were put into positions of power that we had to overcome. And Gary and I were very strategic in what we did. We came forward, and it affected our life more than we could ever put to words. I lost my marriage. I lost friends. I lost so many different things in my life. Through my job, I was they put us in the woodshedded us. A lot of the things that I was doing in my career got sidelined. So you had, because we were the ones speaking the truth and we were coming forward and we were doing in such a fashion that was so aggressive that it really had an impact on our personal lives that we'll take with us for the rest of our life. And I know Gary will say this as well. Like, we're talking about something that we did for the American public that will take years off of our life. And the reason why we are such advocates in coming forward through this documentary, through the book, is because we need this truth out there. We need this to be shown to the American public, because it is so important that in order for us to learn from our mistakes of the past, we need to see that right in front of us. We don't need to be all this media garbage that is pushed in front of us. We need the truth. And Gary and I stood up and spoke that truth, and we still do to this day.
And there was really two worlds, kind of two movies that we were watching. And from our perspective, we were very familiar with the Biden crime family and all of the allegations against them. And it made sense to us, just looking at the evidence, that there's a lot there. But the media and the administration themselves, they were saying there was no there. And they were maneuvering legally. They were creating a special counsel, right, called David Weiss, who was going to go and actually prosecute the case. But turns out he was basically in on it. From our perspective, he was helping to cover the whole thing up. And the media would take these efforts by the Biden administration and then use those as cover. Can you talk about that, kind of what it was like watching the media report in one way while you're living the truth behind the scenes in the undercurrent?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of shocking looking back at it. Like, Gary and I are in the midst of all of it, speaking the truth, and then you would have media articles that would be slanted completely the other way. I mean, you go back to one of the most original things. You had the 51 people that came forward that said that the laptop was disinformation, and then you have what came out after. If people would have truly knew that that was actually accurate information, and that all the things that they did to suppress that information on Twitter, taking down the New York Post articles, all the different things that had happened, that they worked to suppress this narrative, I truly believe that Donald Trump would have won the election by a landslide in 2020. And Now you move forward and we work through that administration. And what they did throughout that is they never expected Gary and I to have the fortitude to come forward, because they're like, these guys will never do it. We'll try to throw them in jail. We'll try to do whatever. But we did it with such precision that they couldn't touch us.
Yeah, and we're glad that you guys were so strategic about it. And maybe Gary, can you explain to us why there's so much institutional pressure against speaking out about this, or how it functions? I know you're a senior, official, or were in this position, and you now moved on in the government still. But how come we didn't see maybe more people speaking out? Why is there an institutional pressure to continue to cover this stuff up such that people don't speak out? And it requires kind of an act of tremendous courage and heroism, like you guys have exhibited, in order to do it.
Well, it's because people feel like they're going to be attacked and retaliated against, and they've seen it on large scales like Joe and I, and they see it on small scales as well. And when you can't really trust the media, and you can't, and people lose faith in the process and what the government's doing, it's one of the most important things is for whistleblowers to be coming forward. So and show that information to the American people, and that's why the documentary is so important as well. But I mean, there are lots of people that knew what was going on, and I don't really throw stones at the folks that didn't come forward. There's some of them that that they just couldn't find it within themselves, and they knew that it's just something that they couldn't handle. And then there are others that kind of blind to the fact that the Department of Justice and FBI and IRS would do something like this. They just had this blind faith, and it took a long time for Joe and I to overcome it. I mean, it took more than 2 years of seeing things that Joe and I and other agents on the case would have conversations, say, can you believe that just happened? And I'm writing reports up to my senior leadership saying, this happened and that happened and this is improper and that's improper. But we still had faith that at the end of the day, the Department of Justice was going to do what they needed to do. And so it was a high burden to overcome. And Joe and I found it at different times, right? Like mine was October 7th, 2022, when I said I needed to blow the whistle. And Joe Ziegler's was a little bit later in May in 2023. So it's just a very high burden. And we've seen lots of whistleblowers come forward and just be destroyed. And this tried to destroy us. But I think Joe and I, working together with the support structure and the legal counsel we had, got us through this.
And Tristan, you were a big part of that. Tristan, of course, the president of Empower Oversight, and you guys work to help protect whistleblowers and fight against the government retaliating against them. When you were looking at this, and when we look at this really in hindsight, what the DOJ, the IRS, and the entire power structure did to Gary and Joe, is this common? Is this weaponization something that we see a lot of, or was this kind of at the level 11? And what can we do about that to prevent this from happening again in the future?
So I think what's unusual about their circumstances, it implicated such high-level officials, right? And so when Jason and I first met with Gary, I remember kind of talking it through with him and comparing it to Operation Fast and Furious, which Jason and I had investigated for Senator Chuck Grassley. And there was this element of both, hey, they are going to come at you with everything they have. And of course, you don't usually see that, right? Usually whistleblowers are retaliated against by government bureaucrats at low levels of their agencies. Sometimes it may rise up a little, but usually these are kind of lower level skirmishes, if you will. And so they do still face retaliation, but this was a much bigger set of officials that Gary and Joe were blowing the whistle on. And so, as was the case with Operation Fast and Furious, the Attorney General was implicated. And of course, in this case, the White House, right? The whole point was that they were not even able to investigate the President of the United States by the time they were coming forward. Joe Biden was in that role. And so I think the real trade-off to that, though, is we told them, hey, on the flip side, right, they're not going to be able to straightforwardly fire you. They're going to mess with you. They're going to do all kinds of things. Of course, we saw that borne out. But, it is challenging. You say, how do you prevent it in the future? Right. I think we have to just continue to try to build a culture of encouraging whistleblowers and making sure that people are willing to support them when they come forward. And that's why we hope this documentary is important, is that it will send that message that, hey, to do it right and to come through it, you've got to have good legal counsel, you've got to be protected, and you've got to do it the right way. But if you do, here's where you can make a huge impact, even taking on, you know, the first family and some of the most powerful people in the world. You know, they threw everything they had at Gary and Joe, and Gary and Joe were able to make it through because, you know, they were doing the right thing. And there is a certain level of kind of attention that comes, you know, public scrutiny that stops them from, you know, blatantly knifing you in the back, but they did in every other way they could, their managers. And of course, the Biden family lied about them. The attorney general lied about them. So, you know, that's where we just need people to engage. That's the best way to prevent this, is if people are paying attention to the facts, they'll say, hey, we know what they're saying about these guys isn't true. And I think that carries its own level of protection as well.
Right. And the Biden family was also, I think, suing, right, Gary and Joe at one point for civil damages and other claims.
Well, they sued the IRS.
Hunter Biden sued the IRS. Abby Lowell sued on behalf of Hunter Biden, sued the IRS, naming our clients. You know, it was for their conduct. But interestingly, you know, they were not parties to the lawsuit, so they actually couldn't defend themselves. And one of the things that we did was we attempted to intervene and said, hey, you know, the agency here that's supposedly the defendant in this lawsuit is actually run by the people who they blew the whistle on. So they're not really an adverse party. And, you know, it raised serious concerns that the IRS might take a dive on the case just to throw Gary and Joe under the bus. If they were to admit, you know, or essentially take, you know, so it would settle the case, right? They could have settled the case and said, oh yeah, sorry, you know, these guys shouldn't have done it this way. They stepped over the line. They did something wrong. Even if that were untrue, that would have created an almost impossible situation for them professionally. And it would have, you know, the PR battle would have been immense if the agency had admitted that something that they did was improper. Of course, it wasn't, because we were very strict and scrupulous in following the statute. They had a right to go to Congress. They, you know, Congress, it was fraught with danger because, as we said, you know, the taxpayer secrecy laws are so serious. And, you know, if an FBI agent leaks about a case, he's violated DOJ policy and he could be disciplined or maybe even fired, but he's probably not going to go to jail if it doesn't involve national security or, you know, classified information. But if an IRS agent leaks about a case, which, you know, these guys were falsely accused of multiple times by Abby Lowell, then, you know, they can be put in jail because it's a crime to leak 6103 or, you know, tax return, secret tax information. So that's what added an extra level of risk and danger for these guys, and why it's so much, you know, there's so much, they should be commended for taking that risk, because it wasn't just risking their careers, it was actually risking their freedom.
Yeah, and there was a lot of power and a lot of money that went into these efforts. I mean, we talked about, I think, $4.9 million of expenses that were being funded by Kevin Morris. I think Hunter Biden's, we call him his sugar daddy. And when you see these types of structures, you know, how frustrating is it that you know, the DOJ doesn't let you investigate these things? And I don't know if that was something that you guys had in your purview when you were investigating this, maybe for Joe or Gary. What was it like facing your own government, private lawsuits, millions of dollars? And how did you guys, I guess, weather the storm emotionally and physically?
Yeah, I think it was through having a fellow whistleblower, having Gary there as, I mean, he's literally become my best friend. Like, to have another person that is going through this trauma, you kind of trauma bond together, and you are talking ideas, like you're talking each other off of ledges. And I mean, even looking back at the Kevin Morris stuff, like literally someone who is potentially allegedly tied in with the CIA, who is paying the expenses of the president's son. I mean, think about how that sounds, like paying the tax debt so that these things don't potentially get into the media. Like it is, you can't even make some of this up. And it sounds so bizarre, but that is what I think is so important from this documentary, and so important from getting this truth out, is so that people understand what had happened. There was one other thing that I wanted to add. If you think, look back at how this family was shielded from ever anything coming forward related to this. You go back to 2014 when Hunter starts on the board of directors for Burisma. He gets a part, he is a part of the investigation regarding Devin Archer, Rosemont Seneca Bohai. There was this tribal bond scheme that he was involved in, but the Burisma money flowed through Rosemont Seneca Bohai. They had Hunter Biden in their radar to potentially investigate regarding the non-reporting of income, the Burisma relationship, all those things that occurred 3 years, but you didn't have people there, good government employees.
Mute.
You fast forward 3 or 4 years later, you introduce Gary and I, and we want to see the case. We want to follow the facts. We want, like, this is, if there's evidence there that shows there was a crime that's committed, we bring those charges. But again, you had a Department of Justice step in and say, no, we got to be concerned with optics. Juice is not worth the squeeze. All the things that came out. And that's what I think is the untold story of this, and what is so important that we tell to the American public so that they see the truth of what has happened since 2014.
Exactly. And the media was helping to facilitate the cover-up. They had justification that there was no there because they said Joe Biden appointed a special counsel and that this was a political attack essentially against the Biden crime family. Then we saw that there was a big conversation from the Oval Office that the president would never pardon Hunter Biden because he was so innocent. Of course, that turned out to be a lie, and Hunter Biden has now been pardoned. And I guess my question is there anything else that we can do? You guys were the investigators on this. Did you see evidence? And maybe you can't talk about it now, but any evidence of other, criminality or other people that are kind of in the blast radius of this whole investigation where accountability can still be delivered in some other context? And we can, whoever wants to take that one.
Yeah, I mean, I can take it. So how do we get accountability? Gary and I, through the grace of this administration, through President Trump and through the Secretary of Treasury, we were elevated into a position to where we were his senior advisors. As being his senior advisors, he saw what we went through over the last 4 years, and he was like, there's a problem here. So we were brought into this position under the current administration to essentially reform the IRS. We need to make sure that all taxpayers are treated the same. We need to ensure that if you are one person or another person with political ties or a political family, that you are treated the exact same regardless of what you have in your background. And what I can tell you and what I've seen as a part of this administration is it is finally happening. We are seeing it in front of our eyes. And I am so proud to work as a part of this administration on this change. And that is the only way that we are going to see success in our government and success in America and right the wrongs of our past is by opening up the things that we did wrong over the past 4 years. And I can tell you, as a part of our efforts, that's part of what we're doing.
And we're glad to hear that. And Gary, maybe over to you. We were covering this and we saw that you guys were ultimately being kind of betrayed from within. We know that there were evidence that you were going to go, or a search warrant was going to be conducted for a Hunter Biden storage facility. And then they got tipped off and then exited the storage facility. So, those types of reforms, you think that you don't really need to teach somebody that or to explain it to them that that's a wrong thing to do when you're investigating that person. So is it a cultural shift? Is it a, start at the top type of leadership problem? How do you address that?
Well, I mean, it is a culture shift, right? And that's why, it's so important for Joe and I to come out and to keep talking about this story, right? I mean, just to put it in context, that what became public in this case was maybe 5% of the evidence that we had in this case, and maybe less than that, right? So, 95% of the things that Joe investigated that we know about today, we can't talk about in this setting or in any setting, because it was never voted out by the House Ways and Means Committee to be able to talk about publicly. So it's really the culture shift. That's why it's so important that Joe Ziegler and I were elevated, and we are in position of authority now, and we're charged with looking at IRS reform and looking at government reform, and we're working with the Department of Justice weaponization groups and several different groups at the Treasury Department. And I have faith that we'll be able to make really positive change, and we continue to root out some of the bureaucracies and some of the policies and procedures that allowed this to occur in the first place. I think that we're on the right path to move forward.
And Joe, you mentioned that you lost your marriage, you lost friends, you lost colleagues. After everything that you've been through, if you had to rewind the clock, would you do this again?
Absolutely, hands down. I grew up with a conservative family. We went to church every Sunday, and not to say that it really did have a lot of impact. Like the faith in God and knowing that God placed his hand on me and was like, hey, you are okay. By doing what's right, I have you throughout this process. And I knew that no matter what were to happen in my life, that's on those people, that's not on me. I was actively in therapy throughout it. I was able to work through a lot of the issues that I had. I mean, people don't know this, but I lost two of my dogs, like to the divorce. Like I lost my house. Gary and I would wake up some of the mornings and scared that they were going to do a search warrant on our house to obtain the records related to that I was turning over to the committees. We had strategies that were like, okay, let's put this in our attorney's possession so that they can't. So those are the things that we had to think about in our life, and that I don't think are portrayed enough in us coming forward. People just saw us on TV. They were like, you guys are stand-up guys. That was great that you guys did that. That was only one small piece of what we did. We did a concerted effort to release the information that was relevant to us blowing the whistle. We were very strategic on going to various media partners to include limiting. If we were going to talk on one that leaned right side of media, I would go on something that would speak left side of media. So what was very important for us from the onset, and why we believed in this truth so much, and that we knew that the American public needed to hear this, we were very strategic in doing that. And through this documentary, and why I think I hope it does go viral, I hope, like, we need this to get out there to the masses. We need because everyone's so focused on things that really don't that don't elevate to what was done over the last 4 years. And I think that's what's so important, is that we speak to the entire, like, to everybody.
Amazing.
Rob, I think what Joe is saying there is really important about the one of the goals of the documentary is for people to see the human impact of this. I think a lot of people who watch shows like yours, who watch cable news, who are on, very online and are interested in politics and interested in government, it's kind of like they see the people as, video game characters, or just people on their team fighting people on the other team. And I think a lot of folks get lost in that, and they don't recognize these are human beings. These aren't cartoon characters that are there for your entertainment, right? These are human beings going through very stressful, these guys, the stress takes a toll on their health. It takes a toll on their life. The risks that they're taking, they're not doing it to score political points. They're doing it because they couldn't not do it, because it was the right thing to do. And even if it was risky, even if it would cost them, they couldn't live with themselves if they didn't do it, because they knew that what was being done by protecting the son of the president of the United States from what would be normal accountability for any other person who did any a tenth of what he did. They just couldn't sit quietly. They sat quietly for years trying to work the problem, trying to get the DOJ to do the right thing for years and years and years. I mean, when they saw the 51 intelligence officials, putting out that thing about it being Russian disinformation, they had known that because of their search warrant to the Apple iCloud, that the laptop had been authenticated long before that. They knew that the government knew that what they were doing was a lie, that what they were telling the American public was a lie. And yet, if they were politically motivated, that's when they would come out, before the election. But they were working the problem, and they had faith, as Gary was saying, they had faith that eventually the government would do the right thing if they just kept their nose to the grindstone and kept working the case. And eventually it became clear that they were never, it was only worse once Joe Biden was elected, right? That he had more power and people in government wanted to make him happy. And so what they essentially did was the Justice Department was going to do a secret backdoor pardon for the president's son so that the president wouldn't have to pardon him. And at the end of the day, because of what Gary and Joe did, he had to do it out in the open where everybody could see it. And they knew that he was going back on his word and creating a double standard of justice because it was his son.
It was a big effort, and we're very glad that you guys came together and made the team that you made and were able to accomplish this. We know it was a lot, and I can say this on behalf of many of us in America. We're very grateful for your work. And so thank you all for joining us on this panel today, and keep up the great work. And now, my friends,
thanks.
Thank you, guys. And now, my friends, we are excited to be joined by the journalist who literally wrote the book on this entire scandal twice. Miranda Devine broke the laptop from hell story in 2020 and then faced a massive censorship campaign. She's also wrote another book called The Big Guy, zooming out to expose the entire foreign influence of the Biden crime family. Miranda, thank you for joining us and for being here.
Thanks for having me, Robert, and fantastic company that I'm keeping with these heroes. I think all four of them, but Gary and Joe for being the whistleblowers and putting their necks on the line. But also, I think they couldn't have survived if it hadn't been for Jason and Tristan and Empower to actually protect whistleblowers, because as you know, and as they found out, it's very difficult to basically tell the truth about malfeasance in the federal government.
They were attacked from multiple angles. So were you. You blew the story out of the water back in October 2020, if I'm right about that, just weeks before the election. Of course, the whole laptop from hell story went viral, and then you got attacked as well. And you're a journalist. And so my question to kick things off is, when this entire thing unfolded, you had the intelligence community, you had big tech, you had multiple groups, millions of dollars. They labeled you Russian disinformation and attacked you as though you were an extension of Putin or something. Did you ever think that this was going to go all the way up? Now, in hindsight, we know a lot more almost 6 years later. Did you ever think this was going to involve the CIA and literal collusion with the Biden campaign?
No, not at the time, not when we initially broke the story back, as you say, 3 weeks before the 2020 election. But the extreme response to that story within a few hours of us going live online with it, we held it back till 5 a.m. when our newspapers were hitting the streets. We were censored by Facebook and Twitter, and they announced. Twitter said that we had violated their hacked materials policy, which was baffling to us because nothing we had was hacked. And Facebook said that they were just throttling our content pending fact checking. And they did such a good job of censoring us that even when people like Kayleigh McEnany, who at that point was President Trump's press secretary, the White House press secretary, when she tried to share our story on Twitter, then Twitter, now X, privately in a direct message to one other person, she was blocked. And the New York Post, we were the, I think, 5th largest by circulation news organization, newspaper. We're also the oldest newspaper in America. And our account was locked for up until a few days before the election, costing us money, but also, telling us that what we had done was somehow wrong and false, and we knew it wasn't. So I guess it was less disconcerting for us on the inside. Myself, Emma Jo Morris, fantastically brave editors, and some, others at the New York Post who worked on this story. Because we realized that we were over the target. At that time, we didn't really have, we had the laptop, but the laptop is a mess, and it's like many pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Now we know that Joe Biden was up to his armpits in Hunter Biden's business. But at that stage, all we knew was that Hunter Biden's business partner in Ukraine, the owner of this, or partial owner of this corrupt energy company, Burisma, that was paying Hunter $1 million a year, that he was thanking Hunter in an email for introducing him to his father, Joe Biden, then the vice president, in Washington, D.C. So we thought that was a pretty bombshell story and deserved an answer from Joe Biden. Well, there's another tell. The Biden campaign went to ground. They told us that, they couldn't find it on Joe Biden's kind of official calendar. They told other media people like the Washington Post, we found out later, that it was a complete lie. So they were telling different stories. Joe Biden went to ground. He was already hiding in the basement. He was just unable to be contacted. He didn't come out for a couple of days. So this story obviously hit the campaign like a bomb. And we weren't even aware of how huge it was. We didn't realize that meeting that Hunter was being thanked for introducing his father to the Ukrainians was actually a dinner at a DC restaurant, a Georgetown restaurant, and called Cafe Milano, in a private room. And that Hunter had invited not just his Ukrainian business partners, but his other business partners from Russia and Mexico and various other places, and Kazakhstan, to meet his father, the vice president. And Joe Biden only admitted that, having denied all, many months after the election, when the New York Times and the Washington Post decided not to ignore the story anymore, not to pretend it wasn't true, not to badmouth us as being kind of tabloid hacks that got everything wrong, but to actually confirm the story. Although I will say, to this day, they confirm the story, but they always say, there's no evidence that Joe Biden was involved. There is so much evidence, it's unbelievable. But as Gary and Joe just told you, they were blocked from never being able to nail that part of Joe Biden's involvement in his son's business down. But we have so much circumstantial evidence, it's really incontrovertible.
And did you face any pressure to resign or to be fired or to be, thrown off the story, to recant or change your opinion on your reporting throughout this process?
No, not at all. I mean, look, the New York Post did not publish those first stories lightly. My editor-in-chief at the time, Cole Allen, who brought me to the New York Post, he's an Australian, and he was my editor back there. He's a very hardcore newspaper man, and he made sure that we had nailed every aspect of the story. And that's really down to Emma Jo Morris, my colleague at the New York Post, who did nail it all down. We were certain every single word that we published over that first week, and continuing, was absolutely watertight, because this was very high stakes. And I have to tell you that the New York Post was alone in American journalism in actually being courageous enough, and that's down to Cole Allen, to publish this story, because I know other journalists were offered the laptop before I was. This was Rudy Giuliani and his lawyer, Bob Costello, wonderful men, who really went out on a limb, and they were given the laptop back in August of 2020 by the laptop repair shop guy that Hunter had abandoned it with, John Paul MacIsaac, another hero of this story, very brave, suffered immensely. But he knew that what he'd seen on the laptop was incriminating for the Bidens. But more importantly, I guess at the time for him, he was a Trump supporter, no crime in that, was that Donald Trump was being impeached over Ukraine, and there was exculpatory material on the laptop that John Paul MacIsaac thought that the Republicans in Congress ought to be able to have to save Donald Trump from being impeached. Unfortunately, every Republican that he tried to contact just ignored him. And finally, Rudy Giuliani and Bob Costello paid attention to his very smart, very forensic, very detailed emails, basically saying exactly what he'd found on the laptop to do with the Burisma grift and Joe Biden's involvement in having the prosecutor general in Ukraine fired, who was actually investigating Burisma. And so that was a very important story. And Rudy Giuliani tried to get other journalists to bite on it, and nobody would. So I was last cab off the rank, literally. They just thought, oh, try Miranda, because I was top of mind. I'd interviewed Mayor Giuliani about something else a couple of days before. So that was sheer luck. But sheer luck turned into a really good, very solid journalism effort by the New York Post, and we kept going at that story for many years. We're still, discovering bits and pieces, and the product of a lot of that is in my books. But there's much more, and you can see from, Gary and Joe, all the information that they brought forward to Congress about the obstruction, the involvement of the CIA and the FBI protecting people around the Bidens. That's never been explained. And I think it's important to, you can't just say, let bygones be bygones, Joe Biden's out, forget about it. Because we're seeing now that it was really the protection of Joe Biden and his family and from their corruption was really the flip side of the concerted attack on Donald Trump, on whether it was, suing him, trying to lock him up in jail, bad mouthing him, and bankrupting him, debanking him and all his family, and so on. And then when that didn't work, trying to kill him. So that is the protection of Joe Biden is the mirror image of what happened to Donald Trump. And I don't think that this country can really settle comfortably into politics as normal until that's resolved. And you see already Susan Rice there, an old Obamaite, also worked for the Biden administration. She's just come out this week talking about revenge against any companies or any entities that have cooperated with the Trump administration. This is the way the Democrats play. They're bad actors. I know I've spoken to Scott Bessent, the treasurer, about game theory. He's big on game theory, from his Wall Street days. And you can apply it to politics too. And in game theory, when you have a bad actor, nothing works. You really can't negotiate with these people. The Democrat Party has become the party of violence and terrorism. They are terrorists, really. And I just don't think that until we get to the bottom of and resolve why the FBI and the CIA were there protecting the Biden family, protecting the crackhead Hunter Biden, then we'll never really understand why the political discourse has disintegrated the way it has now.
And they're completely shameless about it. We saw, so of course, as you mentioned, the social media cover up. We saw an onslaught from all of the institutions. But one of the most shocking things that I thought we saw was when they admitted, Mike Morrell, when he said in his deposition that he wanted literally to help Joe Biden. And then they wrote the 51 intelligence idiot letter and then gave it to Anthony Blinken and then fed that to Joe Biden. And when you look into the Mike Morrell, and I know you've written 2 books about it more than anybody, he was, on the CIA payroll, getting the document approved by CIA, and to enact the CIA in your defense in the middle of a presidential campaign is, to me, one of the most shocking cover-ups in history.
Utterly shocking. And, Mike Morrell was the former acting director of the CIA. And in fact, 5 directors are acting directors of the CIA, including the infamous John Brennan, were part of the 51 signatories of that dishonest letter that claimed, I call it the Dirty 51 letter, claiming that Hunter Biden's laptop, and therefore our stories, was a Russian information operation or disinformation operation. They use weasel words, but that letter, Mike Morell thought that he was going to finally, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. He thought if Biden won the election in 2020, that he was guaranteed to become CIA director. So he was willing to do whatever they wanted him to do. And so when Antony Blinken, who was Joe Biden's long-term confidant and was then a senior person on the campaign, later became Joe Biden's terrible Secretary of State, Antony Blinken called, and said, well, what do you think of this New York Post Hunter Biden story? We need to do something about it. It's a disaster. Joe Biden's about to go on stage against Donald Trump for the final debate. And so Mike Morell takes the call and then springs into action to do whatever the Biden campaign wants him to do. He rustles up this letter, gets 51 or 50 others to sign it. And then he boasts in one of these emails that has been uncovered that he's going to get it expedited through the CIA process, which is, it has to be vetted to make sure there's no classified information if it's come from a former CIA employee. So that goes through the Classification Review Board in the CIA. And they very cleverly realize, oh, this is above our pay grade. This is such a political bombshell coming just less than 3 weeks before the election. We need to send it upstairs. It got sent upstairs to the COO of the CIA, basically number 3, a guy by the name of Andrew McCreadis. And he looked at it and he said, oh, this is above my pay grade. He walks across the corridor from his office and puts it on the desk of Gina Haspel, who was at that stage the CIA director under Donald Trump. She was the director and she gave it the green light to get published, despite the fact that it was a direct intervention into the election and probably swayed the election. It was such a narrow election. And those 51 intelligence officials used the prestige of their former high ranks to make Joe Biden be able to say in the middle of the debate, when Donald Trump brought up Hunter Biden's laptop and the corruption and the Ukraine contacts and the pressure that Joe Biden had placed on the Ukrainians, the war we're going through at the moment, who knows how that was impacted because of Joe Biden's malfeasance. But Joe Biden was able to look down the barrel of the camera and say to the American people back home, what he's saying is a pile of garbage. He and Rudy Giuliani, they are just idiots, because the intelligence community, these great and wonderful men and women who've kept America safe, the national security paragons of virtue like John Brennan, they say that it's Russian disinformation. And that was it. Basically, the story was killed stone dead from then on. And the rest is history. Joe Biden just waltzed his way into the White House and did the most disastrous 4 years that America, I think, has had in a very long time.
Exactly. And do you think that this is about, as you mentioned, protecting their power, securing the presidency? Obviously, those are big motivations. Mike Morell wants to be CIA director. He's going to bend the rules and do things in order to achieve that. Or is there something deeper? Is Hunter Biden a CIA asset? Was he somebody who was, a part of this? Have you seen any evidence that gives us indications one way or another?
Well, there are some interesting little breadcrumbs. One is that when Joe Ziegler and Gary Shapley, the IRS investigators, wanted to interview a man by the name of Kevin Morris, who was a Hollywood lawyer, very wealthy, and a Democrat donor and a fan of Joe Biden, he was tapped to help Hunter Biden get through the problems that he was having, multiple problems. before the election. They obviously, the Democrats realized that Hunter Biden was going to be a big burden to Joe Biden's election prospects because he had a baby mama. London Roberts was suing him. His ex-wife Kathleen was suing him over unpaid taxes, and there was a lien on her house, and she couldn't get a passport to go overseas. So her life was a mess, and he wasn't paying his alimony. He wasn't paying child support. He hadn't paid his taxes. I mean, he was just a mess, and so. For once, something was done about it and it was cleaned up, and it was up to Kevin Morris to come in, clean it up. He got a crack team of accountants and cleanup merchants to help Hunter, and he himself put up, well, it was at least, I think, 7 or 8 million, maybe more, of his own money to pay off all Hunter's debts, pay off his Porsche payments, etc., and basically allow Hunter to live in the lifestyle to which he'd become accustomed growing up as Joe Biden, the poorest man in Congress, as living in his wonderful mansion in Delaware. The whole family had lived a life of luxury. And so Hunter Biden wasn't going to be broke. So he was paying, I think it was like a $30,000 a month rental in Malibu and various other places in LA. His Porsche payments I mentioned, and whatever else it took to support Hunter, his now new wife, and their child, without Hunter having to get his hands dirty and try and earn a crust. And so that went on. So all of that went quiet, and there was no problem for Joe during the campaign, and he won. Now, when Gary and Joe from the IRS tried to interview, the obvious person to interview would be Kevin Morris about all this money that Hunter was getting. They knocked on his door and and then were sent away, and then they tried to do it again, and they were told by the US attorney, or actually his underling, from the DOJ, that they could not interview Kevin Morris because the CIA had summoned the prosecutor to Langley and said, basically, hands off Kevin Morris. No one ever explained it. I've asked Kevin Morris, and he just laughs and makes a joke about it when I ask him if he was a CIA informant or asset or somehow. There's one other little piece. I mean, there's a few others, but one other significant one is that Hunter Biden was, just before he joined the Burisma board, he was placed with zero reason to, no background in foreign affairs, etc., on a very prestigious board, part of the National Endowment for Democracy, which, as Mike Benz has told us all, is basically a front for the CIA. It's sort of their arm of doing soft regime change and so on, without it being the CIA fingerprints. And there's a part of the NED, that organization, that the Democrats belong to, and a part that some handpicked Democrats, handpicked Republicans belong to. And Hunter Biden, usually they're congressmen and so on, but Hunter Biden was placed on that board, and he was very proud of it. He put it in his resume, and when Burisma picked him up, it was part of his something that he was boastful about, until he wasn't anymore, and then it sort of disappeared from his CV. But that was also very curious, and obviously it's because Hunter Biden was Joe Biden's son, and Joe Biden was just a patsy for the sort of anti-Trump establishment, going way back to his very early days as a senator, when he was one of the first American politicians to travel to China and get duchessed by the CCP. And I think from that moment on, the CCP knew that they had a good guy in Joe Biden to do their bidding, and plenty of millions of dollars went to the Biden family to make sure that Joe Biden, when in his powerful positions, made sure that China got the heads up or didn't have anything disastrous happen to them. Donald Trump, on the other hand, was not controllable. He's uncontrollable. And that's the beauty of him, and why he's been able to cut through, and why his voters voted him in twice. But that makes him very dangerous to unelected, shadowy people, the deep state, who have all sorts of agendas that I don't think we fully understand.
Amazing. And you've been working on this for years. And can you tell us, briefly why you think this documentary is so important? What is there else to tell the American people, and what do they need to know?
It's really important because it's an incredibly complicated story. And, as you said, I've been living and breathing it since, for 6 years. And there are still big questions and elements that I learn every time, I speak to Gary and Joe. They're obviously constrained by the fact that they work at the IRS, and thank goodness for Scott Bessent and for Donald Trump that they were, not punished. I mean, they were punished so badly under Joe Biden for being honest. But now, you see they've both had promotions, and Gary's, 2IC in charge of criminal investigations. So that's great. But everybody else, we've got Bob Costello, we've got all the main players, John Paul McIsaac, John Solomon. Everybody has got pieces of the jigsaw puzzle to tell the story in a very crisp and clear manner. And I think the importance of this is that the more people who see it and it comes to life on screen, the more they will understand how sinister and dangerous that period was, and what a lucky escape we had. It's all to do with power and the Democrats really selling out America to China, losing our soul. And I think we're really at a high watermark. We're now facing into the midterms. I think there are a lot of Trump voters who they don't come out for midterm elections, but they need to understand that it's really important that they do this time. This is otherwise the Trump agenda will just be stopped in its tracks, and he will be impeached again, and it'll just be a state of paralysis, leading into another con election. The Democrats can't win on their policies, so they win by rigging the system every which way. The Dirty 51 letter was just one way they did that. So I hope that this documentary will galvanize people to get out, understand the stakes here more than ever.
They almost got away with it, Miranda, and you didn't not let that happen. Thank you for all your work, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Robert.
My friends, we've got our next guest. He had a front row seat to the Biden brand. Devon Archer was Hunter Biden's one of his closest business partners for a decade. He has seen the foreign deals. He was on the speakerphone calls when Hunter would call his dad, Joe Biden. And of course, he knows the insides and out of our dual system of justice. Devon Archer, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And we remember, it's great to have you. And we remember seeing you testify in front of Congress about this very scandal. And you did a great job. We learned a lot of details that I think that the Biden family would not have wanted to hear. And you explained back then on the record that Joe Biden was actually on the phone. And so my question, of course, is, first of all, how did you get connected with the Biden family and kind of get into this position where you were inside the inner circle?
Right. The story goes, back to kind of college days where we overlapped. While I was at college, he was at law school. And, allegedly, according to some LLM models, we met. I don't remember that. But through the years, I ended up meeting him a couple times in 2000, in 2004. And then we were introduced by a mutual friend in 2009. He had to essentially pare down his lobbying business. And there was a mutual friend who was an attorney in New York. And he actually, came to lunch with me and said, I'm going to have to do this. I had an emerging and fairly well-established private equity company and firm in 2009. And he said, I've got interesting, relationships. My father's obviously the vice president. That was obviously interesting to us. We have, access to capital, access to deal flow. And it wasn't like a solicitation for me to invest money in him, but he said, could we start, a joint venture where I could, start to get some exposure to private equity? And I talked to my partner at the time, and we thought, what could go wrong? And the rest is history. And now we're here on an interview on, before this incredible documentary, and a lot went wrong, but I think a lot was exposed. And I think one of the tools is, through all the guests that you've had on, who are all become really close friends of mine, a lot of important things have been exposed through that process. So what could go wrong also went right, because I think we're in a better place for people having transparency and kind of moving into, God willing, a better time in politics.
Yeah, and ultimately the DOJ ended up coming after you, and I wanted to
Yes.
ask about that because my question is, do you think that pressure from the DOJ was because you were no longer towing the Biden family line, like you were being squeezed because you were not protecting them, or how did that develop?
Yeah, the story is it's far too complicated to get into in this format. I think explain some of it, across a couple hours with Tucker Carlson and some in the documentary. But at the end of the day, Hunter was targeted. So the initial focus from the DOJ, he was targeted in some SARS activity with a bank account across a firm that I owned with him, and that pressure came on him for suspicious bank activity. They looked into the firm. They identified, they identified a crime. He was the initial target, but when his attorneys and the power of kind of the West Wing Southern District came looking for him, they said he's too big to fail. Let's go after someone else. So I was a witness in the original investigation, and then basically, within 30 days, switched to a target, unbeknownst to me. Why we still my attorneys, when the FBI came to my door right here with up armored in their bulletproof vests and long guns and short guns and cars and lights. We still didn't we had absolutely no idea why I was being arrested. I just knew it had to do with this firm that we owned, and I was very unclear on why it was me. I learned through a very expensive and very long trial what they were actually going after. I ended up getting exonerated in that trial. And then on the Second Circuit technicality, they ended up reversing that. And so ended up, being sentenced, and then had my sentence vacated. And then, God willing, or thank God, President Trump pardoned me in March. But what happened was the pressure, it was a very unique pressure, just to get back to your question, because it's a very abbreviated version of a very complex story, that involved multiple grand jury testimonies of Hunter with me during that process. But what happened was when Trump was elected, I was still in my case, even though my sentence had been vacated, and they were essentially waiting for, the God's will of the pardon from Trump. And the embedded, whoever the powers may be, the day before I was to go testify to Congress, they tried to send me, have me report, unbeknownst to me, to prison. They later apologized a couple days later, thanks to mostly to Comer going on the Sunday show saying, when was the last time the Southern District actually worked on a Saturday? But the pressure just heated up. The more I did not keep my mouth shut, the more that I, told the truth, the more pressure I felt from within the system, to basically report to prison, serve a series of $42 million in liens. And that pressure just built and built and built, and it was almost exhausting. And 8 weeks after the president took office, I was, fortunate enough to be with him at the national finals NCAA wrestling match, and he summoned me over and said, "We're going to do this now." And so the rest has been, it's been a quite, after a 10-year saga, a really great year to rebuild with my family.
Yeah, and that's amazing. And we're glad that there's been some progress, and there's moving beyond kind of out of the blast zone of what happened. I guess my question is, if we go back to some of those phone calls and to some of those conversations where Hunter calls his dad, you're in the meeting, and one of the first times I heard from you was on that interview with Tucker Carlson, and I was kind of taken aback because you didn't seem to me like Hunter Biden. You seemed like a very competent, articulate person with some intelligence, whereas Hunter didn't really ever come across that way. He's always kind of appeared to be a drug addict and a troubled person. When you were in these deal flows, and I, of course, can understand wanting to, have close proximity to the VP's son and how that can kind of facilitate things. Did Hunter bring anything else to the deals, or was that just kind of the main highlight, was the fact that his dad was the VP?
Well, yeah, I mean, the main highlight and the big headline, and I'd say the first 5 chapters, were the Biden brand, right? And that was That was one of the it wasn't that, you know, clever a term, but one of the alliteration terms that I think Jim Jordan, when I was in congressional, rolled his sleeves up all the way up in his arm and said, "Oh yeah, it is the Biden brand. What is that?" So yeah, the Biden brand is what they sold. Again, he was in this, you know, kind of, you know, servicing business and the lobbying business, and that's a complex, you know, world to navigate. So it was certainly eye-opening to get that, you know, to see that initial, you know, walking the halls of Congress and speaking to the, you're right, you know, cabinet secretaries to advance agendas where, you know, governance and their and you know and you know, law or appropriations are involved. So there was, you know, there was nothing on the deal side. There was nothing accretive to our business. Quite frankly, it ended up, you know, ruining my life. Quite frankly, it took my 40s, you know, bankrupted the business that we were in due to his SARS activity, the initial investigation there that landed me in a 10-year fight with the Southern District of New York. And so, you know, as far as there were some interesting things, like I got to go to the Easter egg roll with my 8-year-old son, but other than that, from a business standpoint, there's nothing accretive. And, you know, for my family's investments, for multiple other investors in our firm, there's, you know, I would say hundreds of millions of dollars of losses incurred. So it was an absolute negative. You had businesses go out of business, and, you know, people that had worked at firms for 50 years, all, you know, based on, you know, quite frankly, you know, nothing it was nothing that he did nothing in particularly bad than abuse soft power, right? And he, you know, exploited the brand, you know, basically used the brand for access, to show heft. But what I really found, kind of looking back over these years, is just the lie, you know, the lie that his dad had no understanding of business. He didn't know who his business partners were. He didn't know he was doing business in China. He didn't know he was doing business in Ukraine, you know, or wherever else in the world he was doing business. And that was absolutely false. And it was just perpetuated on the American people. I think there's a great, you know, the trailer to the documentary we're going to watch is, you know, just how many times he talks about the non-dealings with his, it's absolute hypocrisy. And, you know, hopefully we've kind of crossed a chasm where the American people don't ever deserve that type of blatant lie. I think the interaction between them, hopefully, if anything we've gained on that, is just to give the respect to the American voter and the American people to have some transparency on what's happening in this world. And that was, you know, that generation between those two and the lies about not knowing us and absolute deniability was just, it was shocking and upsetting. And, you know, I think the film does a good job in kind of just encapsulating, taking those sound bites of, you know, there's conference calls talking about business. We're in Paris. We're, you know, doing a deal in Madrid. The vice president's on the phone every night saying, okay, go guys, do that. You know, we're having dinner at Cafe Milano. We certainly used it as a, you know, and as an access tool and a flex of power, and, you know, marketed the Biden brand. And then they just denied it on the mainstream media over and over and over again. I think this film does a great job kind of highlighting that and highlighting the hypocrisy of all of that in the Democrat Party, quite frankly.
Right. And you've got some details about the specific evidence, right? There was a note, I believe, from Joe Biden about Hunter's business activities that's concrete.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, that note, I actually put that note, or I gave that note to Tucker, and Miranda ended up running it on the cover of the Post. "Letter of the Lie," I think was the headline. And in that particular, you know, obviously there's just the you know, the pure understanding that you know each other. But there's a note that's, you know, somewhat typed on official White House, you know, stationery. It says, you know, something to the effect of, you know, "Devin, I'm sorry, I was too busy with the president of China," which too busy with the president of China in the White House dining room to spend much time with you. "I'm so sorry about that. You know, we'll catch up later. And I'm really," you know, and then handwritten PS, "Yeah, I'm really glad you're doing business with Hunter, or you're with Hunter," in handwriting, you know, "Sincerely, Joe Biden." So, I mean, that's just the most concrete of evidence, but it was, you know, it's even to point to that as an exhibit is, just, you know, it really underestimates the amount of kind of interaction and use of the Biden brand that was kind of available, which, again, I feel, you know, it was what we didn't know that we were not supposed to be doing that. And I didn't know he was gonna, you know, lie for the next 10 years, get elected president, and continue to perpetuate that lie. I mean, you saw in the debates with Trump in 2020, and it's just it's upsetting. But again, I think we're making progress.
Yeah, and Joe Biden then continued to lie about his business knowledge about that for a long time, and then the whistle started to kind of blow on that one. Now they wanted to put you in prison, right? I think you were sentenced at one point
Yes.
to a year and a day in prison. Meanwhile, Hunter Biden gets a pardon from dad and is
Right.
not held accountable for any of this. Can you explain kind of how it feels to be the scapegoat of the family that then exonerates the son who is responsible for a lot of this, and the father who's enabling the exploitation of the Biden brand?
Yeah, well, I can just, I can really, how I feel right now is I feel redeemed, and I'm so happy and I'm so blessed that that my 50s started in a different trajectory than my 40s. But it felt horrible. It was, I mean, there's no way to kind of describe the loneliness in a sense of just being kind of on the top of the world on a trajectory professionally from a middle class background, and having been so proud of what I'd done, and then for no apparent reason, just because a partner that had a lot of advantages to have, but was obviously flawed with addiction and fairly sketchy, and had absolutely no loyalty to someone who had been supporting him over the previous 5 or 6 years. It was devastating, but resistance makes you stronger. So I don't I don't want to look back, but it's a dark period. I have my health, I have my family, I have my faith, and so I'm doing all right. But I think it was it was a terrible dark period of doom and gloom, and not I would say I was at a point where I was definitely considering is it worth it to be around here after you lose everything and you think you're going to lose your family and your homes, and it was just it was devastating. And then also the other part that's so devastating in that is like the people that doubt your honesty, because the vice president of the United States and the White House, which then commandeers the mainstream media, paints you in this light, and and you see yourself on the news, and accused of all ridiculous activity that you end up fighting, going to trial. They offered me 300 hours of community service at some point, and I said no, I didn't do anything. I mean, this is just, I'm a total scapegoat. I'm not gonna rest on the principles of just taking a knee. I could never live with that and never be able to look my kids in the face and go on. So lonely, but you know what? It was lonely. It was hurtful. It was painful financially. It was painful for my family, for my parents. It was, I don't get embarrassed easily, but I'm sure a lot of my friends and family were embarrassed for me, or embarrassed because of their associations with me. But I feel good. I think in the end, telling the truth and telling the truth and getting my story out there will hopefully have a positive impact on history, similar to what we're going to see tonight.
Yeah, and you were involved in the documentary, obviously. Do you think that there's a possibility of more justice coming down for any other maybe co-conspirators of Hunter? We know he got the pardon, but you were very inside, and I imagine that there were other enablers of this. And part of what I thought of that note when we first read that note that the president wrote to you was almost an effort to kind of have Hunter maybe come under your wing. And I don't know the timeline, if he was troubled then,
right,
or what addictions were, but almost like older brother, younger brother. And I think even Hunter was in text messages to you and saying things about, we're a great family and we have to do certain things in order to stay a great family. And I would imagine there's a bunch of other people who are involved in a lot of this criminality.
Yeah, I think as far as follow-on prosecution, I mean, listen, there's statute of limitations. They can toll conspiracies. I think within the kind of framework of how our laws work, things have been, I mean, I spent so much time with Miranda and her books. Things have been vetted beyond belief. And with the amount of people that were involved relative to the dollars that were mostly for the Biden family, I don't know if you're going to find kind of a political will to personally, that's just my feeling. I don't know, but I think it's exhausted. I think, continuing to tell the story, hopefully continuing to tell the story about, the cover up. The cover up was almost worse than the crime in their denial of business activity while being in the position of vice president, and for in lesser extent when he was president, obviously, other than maybe some art deals that were a little sketchy. But other than that, I don't see a big follow on there. I think that people are ready to move on, but I think shedding light on on how the old system worked, or how the Democrat mainstream media system worked, and shedding light, making sense of the story, just helps us go better, helps everyone, quite frankly, across the aisle be better in just being honest, and having some kind of ethics going into particular situations. Like in the, if we'd been now and had the opportunities, and Hunter solicited me and to come and join my business now, I would certainly, I would run, not walk. But I don't think that's we're gonna end up in that space, just because of how much light has been shed up in this situation.
Well, it was a rocky road. We really appreciate the fact that you have now become, transparent and revealed a lot of the inside disgustingness that we saw for a long time with the Biden crime family. We appreciate you being here, and we're looking forward to seeing you in the documentary. Thank you, Devin.
Yeah. Thank you, Robert. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you very much. All right, my friends. Well, we have our next guest. And of course, every massive scandal, like we've been talking about, has a ground zero. Joining us now is John Paul Mac Isaac, the computer repair shop owner who legally received the laptop, saw the corruption, and did something that I think a lot of other people wouldn't do. He alerted the FBI, and his life was made hell in the aftermath of that. John Paul, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on.
We appreciate you being here. Thanks for doing the right thing. I think many others would not have done that. Can you, for our audience who may not have heard kind of the story, can you give us a quick recap about how you're sitting there, and then this scandal that becomes a nationwide, global scandal just lands in your lap, and how you handled that?
Well, I knew by the summer of 2019, well, first off, Hunter came into my shop inebriated, dropped off 3 laptops. I left 2 of them to be with him. I checked in one for a data recovery. He came back in once the recovery was complete, dropped off a drive, and then he ended up never showing back up. And towards the middle of the summer, when I started to see mentioning of Burisma in the news, I knew that I was sitting on something. I was also kind of fearful because I had seen a lot of sensational material on that laptop that had me worried that somebody in the Biden cleaning crew was going to make the laptop disappear, and possibly me. So I had kind of a no-brainer. It was go to the FBI, though I was worried that the FBI wasn't necessarily the right course of action because of prior occurrences with like Roger Stone's house getting raided. I think the prior January made me a little nervous, but I knew it was the right course of action. When you see criminality, a citizen should be able to report it to the authorities.
And you did that. So you ultimately gave it to the FBI, but did they act on it immediately? I thought they kind of held on to it for a while and then nothing materialized.
Well, I didn't trust the FBI in my neck of the woods. I knew that good old boy politics and kind of ran rampant in northern Delaware. So I enlisted my father to try to give the FBI a copy of the laptop in Albuquerque. And they kicked him out of the office, told him to lawyer up, and we didn't hear back from the FBI. And that was in October, early October of 2019. It was a month later when the FBI reached out to my father in an effort to get a hold of me. And when they reached out to me, they came to my house. I once again tried to give them the laptop. They were like, no, we don't want to touch it. Eventually, on December 9th of 2019, they showed up at my shop with a subpoena. They took all the paperwork, they took Hunter's copy of the drive, and they took the laptop. And I thought my involvement was over. And unfortunately for me, it wasn't. The FBI, when they were leaving my shop, I kind of cracked a joke. I said, don't worry, lads, I'll leave your name out of the book. And that's when Agent Mike turned around and told me that in his experience, nothing ever happens to people that don't talk about these things. And when the impeachment, actually it was I think it was the first impeachment trial by then was in February of 2020. And I was fully expecting to see that laptop materialize as at least in the defense for the president that was being attacked for what appeared to me to be activities that the former vice president was fully engaged in. And yeah, so I knew at that point in time, the FBI probably cared more about protecting the Bidens than they cared about protecting me or holding anybody accountable from the laptop. And that's when we set out to try to reach out to members of Congress. My father, who was a retired colonel in the Air Force, as well as my uncle Ron, who was another retired colonel. They went knocking on doors, and everybody's Praetorian Guard stood on our way, and nobody was listening. And finally, by August, I threw up my hands and I said, I need to get this to a lawyer for the president. And I went to Rudy Giuliani's website and filled out a form, very descriptive, and hit submit. And Bob Costello called me the next day. And then the rest is history, I guess.
And you still were the subject of a lot of accusations that you perverted the data, that you were the one who maybe manipulated it. Obviously, we saw the 51 laptop letter saying this was all, all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. You're a tech person, you're very good with computers. You ran a computer repair store. Can you walk us through kind of the preservation, process that you went through and how the chain of custody was still valid?
Yeah, absolutely. So when Hunter hired me to do a data recovery off the machine was liquid damaged, and I could not just do a clone of the drive. I had to manually recover the data. I recovered it to an external hard drive that I made for Hunter. Later, before the FBI, my father reached out to the FBI, I had to make him a copy. I cloned that original copy and made 2 copies. One was kind of a dead man switch should something ever happen to me. And the other one was the one that my father would take to the FBI. That copy that sat in a manila envelope, which was basically, if I disappeared, I had a friend that was going to go and hand deliver that copy to Rudy Giuliani. That sat in a lockbox for about 9 months until I ultimately FedExed it to Rudy Giuliani. So I kind of think if I had done that first, I might have saved myself some hassle. But that's the way it went down. And I have the original copy that I made that I have been comparing it to copies that I've intercepted out on the web, just to make sure nobody's trying to, squeeze a rooster past a sunrise.
And the evidence on that laptop obviously was of national consequence. So after you have contact with Rudy, it is really just beginning, right? So now it's finally getting kind of outside of the containment field that the FBI was trying to avoid. What was your process in the aftermath of that? I mean, I think you've been involved in litigation. They've been aggressively trying to take you out. Can you share some of that with the audience?
Well, sure. I thought I was done once I got it to Rudy, and I kind of washed my hands of it. And I told everybody, I don't want anybody to know who I am. Actually, I told Bob Costello I didn't even want Rudy to know who I was. I just wanted this to get to the authorities, and that was the end of it. Unfortunately, my information got published. Enough of my information was published on October 16th, that people figured out rather quickly who I was and where my shop was. And I immediately felt public pressure. A lot of angry people reached out immediately, a lot of death threats. I had to get the Wilmington police involved. Up until the point where I had to close up my shop about 15 days after the story broke, because the death threats were getting too serious. Angry people would call and their area codes were from California or New York or other places far, far away. But when the death threats started coming in and they were from Jersey phone numbers and Pennsylvania phone numbers, I knew it was time to get out of Dodge. So I went out to Colorado, kind of laid low for about a year. In that time, I decided I wanted to fight back. So since I felt initially nobody was going to believe this Russian conspiracy thing, I don't necessarily look like your typical KGB agent. But I was upset that Twitter had labeled me a hacker, because in my industry, if you get labeled a hacker, you're pretty much done. You'll never do business again, which is actually has turned out to be the case. So I sued Twitter. Unfortunately, I sued Twitter before Elon bought Twitter. And I also sued Twitter when The former head of the FBI's legal team was still in charge of legal at Twitter. So they pretty much cleaned my clock, and I lost my suit. Twitter was awarded the Florida slap statue. So I ended up having to pay them $175,000, which I think the whole point of that was, here's somebody going up against big tech. Let's make sure nobody ever goes up against big tech again. So, and it worked. It definitely knocked my wind out of me and kind of took me out of the fight. It wasn't until about 8 months later that a group, the America Project, reached out. I think Joe Flynn's project reached out and wanted to fund some additional lawsuits that I wanted to do. I just was completely broke. I wanted to go after Adam Schiff because he lied to the American people and using his congressional protection to do so, saying that I was a stooge of Putin. And I wanted to go after CNN because they gave him the platform to do it. I wanted to go after Hunter because he could have at any point in time told the world that this was his laptop and not some Russian plot. And I wanted to go after the campaign to elect Joe Biden because I wanted to go after Anthony Blinken, and I wanted to go after the people that orchestrated that 51 letter. I knew I couldn't go after the actual 51 individuals, but I knew I could at least try to hold the campaign to elect Joe Biden accountable. Unfortunately, I lost all those lawsuits. Hunter countersued me, which, in all fairness, I did sue him first. So, that went back and forth for about 4 years. But yeah, the lawfare was ridiculous. It was just, its sole purpose was to take me out of the fight, to punish me, and to set an example to make sure that anybody that has the potential of blowing a whistle in the future doesn't dare think about doing it.
Right. And it was very obvious once the files hit the internet and we all started looking through them. It was very clear that this was legitimate evidence that came from Hunter's laptop. But you had the CIA, you had Congress, like you mentioned, Adam Schiff, all trying to reframe the narrative that basically you did this, that you got this information fed to you from the Russians, or that you got in there and perverted stuff. And if I remember right, Hunter, signed a document. I think we saw it at one point, his signature on there, kind of confirming that if it's left in your shop for 90 days or whatever the situation was, it becomes abandoned property. He signed it and then never came and picked it up. Can you walk us through a little bit more of that?
Yeah. So on the bottom of all my documents, and it's standard operating procedure for computer repair shops, if you don't pay for it, if you leave it, if you abandon it, just like if it's trash and you're a police officer, there's no presumption of privacy when it's something you abandon. And that property became mine after 90 days, and I could do with it as I please. And when Hunter sued me, he never sued me for stealing his property, or he sued me for disseminating his data and sharing it with the public. And the only reason why he didn't win and take me to the cleaners was because he was told by his legal team to deny that it was his laptop, to blame the Russians or say it was stolen. And he did that for so long that by the time the statute of limitation, if he had sued me 4 months prior, he would have won. Delaware courts would have handed him everything I own.
That is a scary prospect that a person in the right can suddenly lose their entire livelihood. And of course, a lot has happened since then. So the laptop comes out. Rudy Giuliani shares a lot of this. We have the election. Then we have 4 years of Biden. What was life like when you're, the guy who almost took out the presidency?
Well, it's not. I'll tell you, Delaware can be a bit vindictive. Let's see. I started getting, I spent the first year out of Delaware because it wasn't safe for me to come back. But then when I was worried about bankruptcy and losing my home, I had to come back and occupy my home. So I had to move back to Delaware. And I started getting audits from the IRS back for like $57 from 2016. So they started coming at me from there. I tried to file for unemployment and I was rejected. It took me about a year to finally, and writing a letter to Chris Coons to get any traction on that. I had my house swatted about a year and a half ago. There's members of the Delaware Department of Justice that are trying to convince the courts that I am a danger to society so that I'm disarmed. And that's scary. So yeah, it's a constant struggle. And that 4 years, you know, the FBI, I think a couple of days after the article broke in October, I think it was 18th, they came out with a story that they were investigating the laptop for foreign information. And that just put, you know, unfortunately, 90% of Northern Delaware doesn't watch Fox News or Newsmax or ONN. So what happens is they still think I'm a Russian spy. They still think I'm a hacker. They still think that I did this for Trump and I got a huge payout. And I post something on Nextdoor. I get people try to get me banned from social media. I've been shadow banned from YouTube. Yeah, it's been a constant struggle. The last 4 years or the 4 years under Biden were really rough, really scary. I can tell you, I don't feel like the FBI is going to kick down my door right now. So that's been an improvement. I'd like to see more improvements, but I definitely feel like we're in a better place, and that we're able to tell these stories and not get ridiculed for it or called a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, and I would imagine some accountability would be good for some of the people who made your life living hell. Can you tell us about, the documentary, why you think it's important and how your story fits in?
Well, I think any opportunity to share the truth and to cut through the media lies, to reach outside of the conservative echo chamber to share the story is going to be a benefit. It's going to help clear my name. It's going to help clear a lot of people's names that were involved in this, that were labeled or grouped into conspiracy theorist or, a stooge of Russia. So obviously the benefits personally and on a group for getting the truth out is important. I think the bigger story for me was when I realized when social media shut down Twitter or shut down the New York Post access to Twitter, when I realized that this was a lot bigger than me and my personal safety and what's going to happen to me. This was a coordinated effort between social media, mainstream media, federal agencies, all galvanized and working together to help a political candidate. And I think that if both sides see that in a story and then it's presented with truth and facts, I think that we won't be in a position to have that happen again. And that's what I'd like to have come out of this documentary.
And how are you now? I see you got the Mac shop sign behind you. Are you back in business, or what are you working on these days?
No, that's all that's left of my business. There's zero interest in me being in the community. I feel it when I interact with anything outside of my home. It's a flip of the coin whether I'm going to be treated fairly or not. So I'm just trying to get out of Delaware in one piece, and I'm hopefully going to do that sooner than later. And then I'll have a shot at having my life where I can have a fair shot at having it back.
Well, I know you were shadow banned and attacked, as you mentioned, on YouTube. Can people connect with you now? Are you, publishing anything, or can people follow you or support you in the meantime while this documentary is being processed?
Well, I wrote a book. When I lost my lawsuit with Twitter, I thought this is it. They robbed me blind, and I'm now going to be murdered or something. So I figured if I don't get this story out, so I wrote everything down in a book, and I tried to get it published, but everybody was coming back saying, "Aren't you a Russian spy?" And nobody wanted to even look at the book or entertain me. So it wasn't until I was able to speak to Miranda Devine and said, "You got to help me out. I wrote this book," and she actually helped me get it published, and I'm grateful for her for that. And I wish there was more interest when all this was happening, because I kind of felt like a little bit out on my own. I understand that it was not a good place for conservatives to be in to fight battles against people that went up against the sitting president. So I'm hoping that this documentary will help with awareness, and people will see what I did was the right thing, that I did what any American should do when they see criminality, and that we should all hope that people are held accountable so they don't try to pull this stuff again. And if that's what can happen, then I can feel better about moving on.
Well, we're very glad that you joined us here tonight, and of course, for speaking up and doing the right thing. I think a lot of other people would have buckled under the pressure and just said, "I don't want to deal with this," but you didn't do that. And now we know a lot of things that we did not know, and the truth is coming out. So, of course, we're excited to see you in the documentary, and I hope that a lot of people will share it and spread it around like wildfire, because you're an innocent party to this whole thing. You got something dropped on your lap, shared evidence of clear criminality and the truth, and you got punished for it by our own government. So we really appreciate you. John Paul Mac Isaac, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, sir. Cheers.
Cheers. Prayers up for John Paul. My friends, we are now joined next. If you want to know exactly what the government was trying to hide that John Paul Mac Isaac found on that laptop, you ask our next guest. Good friend of ours, Garrett Ziegler, the founder of the nonprofit Marco Polo, and his team did what the FBI refused to do. They published a comprehensive 644-page entire dossier. You see it right back there on our shelf, standing proud, explaining what was on the laptop. And then, like everyone else, Garrett Ziegler got sued by Hunter Biden and had his life in turmoil for bringing out the truth. Garrett, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. Good evening. Hope Arizona's doing okay. I've been watching the news. That robbery thing is weird, man. I mean, as a criminal defense attorney, you'll have better insights than me, but I've been thinking about you with that Tucson stuff. I know you're not in Tucson, but still.
Well, we appreciate that. Yeah, it's a national story, no doubt about it. But thank you for coming on here and talking about this laptop. Can you give us some background on what you created and why you took on this monumental task of combing through one of the most disgusting laptops in the history of the planet?
Well, this is a very complex story, and I'm grateful to Mr. Dodge for getting all these different disparate groups together to talk about this. And this story was secondhand to me when I was in the White House working for Peter Navarro in late 2020. I didn't have any connection to the shop owner, Mr. McIsaac, who was just on, or Devin Archer, or anyone. My interest in this device came from the verifiable, voluminous, and quite frankly, incredible connections between high-level Chinese communists and the former First Family. And so when I started digging into this and I caught my breath after Joe was installed, I started looking into it like a private investigator would. You mentioned the group Marco Polo at the top. There's 2 PIs on our board, and we just went through it like any thorough PI would, Robert, which is going through every single contact. You know, it's funny. I was watching every interview you did in this program tonight, and it's funny still to this day. Listen to Devin talk, because I got to know his voice through these communications. And that, you know, I could tell when you know, what mood Devin was in when he was iMessaging Hunter vis-a-vis email. It's somewhat weird to meet those people in person now. So we took 15 months to go through this like any PI would and produce that dossier that you have behind you. We did an updated cover because one of the patrons to our groups, they like Hunter. We call this a personality pick. The kids call this a personality pick. It's really Hunter in his element. He's in Newburyport, Massachusetts, with 2 females in a bathtub. And our key contribution to this entire fiasco, and again, I stress that I was secondhand to this. I was not involved directly with the handoff of the device or you know, anybody else. Our contribution was to put this in an academic format. We have in this dossier 15 whole pages of a timeline. So if you want to know precisely when Mr. McIsaac's father, rest in peace, went to the Albuquerque field office, we have that. If you want to know what precisely Hunter was doing in the Ukraine and which statutes he violated, we have that. So our job was to approach this antiseptically, and for that, like you mentioned at the top, we were sued for it. And Hunter did not sue us for defamation or private revelation of a fact, right? He sued us for hacking, which is, of course, ridiculous because to this day, the FBI still has his device. One thing that most people don't realize is JP is entitled to get that device back. The FBI took it via grand jury subpoena, as he mentioned, on December 9th of 2019, and he should get it back yesterday. That device is his. Hunter never claimed it, as you mentioned. It's perhaps the most interesting case of property abandonment, Robert, in United States history. And Hunter, and his lying lawyer, Abby Lowell, who sued me and JP, won't go on record and say Hunter didn't drop it off. They just, in their true sophist manner, say that he can't recall. Well, guess what, Robert? I don't care what a crackhead recalls or not. That is immaterial. Crack literally ruins brain neurons. So the fact that Hunter can't recall something is irrelevant. And so my job was to, from an outsider's perspective, say which violations of law he engaged in, namely FAR violations, 22 USC 612, conspiracy violations, 18 USC 371. I'm not an attorney, but I did memorize the US code in this area of law. And Hunter did what Paul Manafort did at a much greater scale and with many different countries. Remember, Paul Manafort was mugshotted for representing the Party of Regions in the Ukraine. Hunter did that with multiple foreign countries: Ukraine, China, Romania, Libya, Serbia. We have all that in this device. And one of the contributions that we made to this saga, you asked me, how I got involved, is we put all of the emails online. This is how I met you, Robert. This is how I met you in 2022. In May of 2022, we put all 128,000 emails online so that researchers, activists, and just normal citizens could go read this. Remember the feeding frenzy going on with the Epstein files right now?
Yep.
We were doing a smaller version of that with a $250,000 a year budget C3 with zero help. And we've had to spend $500,000 on lawyers. And of course, Hunter and Morris, his sugar brother, dropped the cases against us because they were all political. But this is a fascinating topic. I'm very proud to be involved with the documentary because it's going to be professionally produced. This is not my area. I was asking Chris Dodge for help on which camera to get. This is not my area. My version of a perfect day is looking into property records of the Bidens. That's what I did. And so I know this has been a monologue, but this story is a case of astronomical protection. When you think of what Hunter Biden's legacy is going to be in the future, yes, he's a disbarred lawyer. Yes, he's the most degenerate first family member ever in American history, even worse than Clinton's relatives and Jimmy Carter's. It's going to be, he was the most protected individual in America. You had every powerful institution, the Aspen Security Forum, every member of the lying press protect this guy. And for him, Robert, and for him to this day not accept that and to say that he was tread upon and that he was the one who was treated unfairly, I can't let that lie. So my beat is going to be active on this topic until he stops lying. Once he stops lying, I'll push back. But he's still going out on the Sean Ryan show for 5 hours. I would urge your audience to read the book online for free at bidenreport.com, but also go.
Can you flip through it real quickly? Because there was something profound about receiving a copy of that book, right? You can look at emails online, you can read some of the text messages, and it's really hard to, I think, kind of fathom the depth and the scale of it. And I've got multiple copies of that book. I've gifted copies of that book to people who didn't really know anything about it. They look at it and they're shocked, right? It's all on paper and you can see the depravity right in black and white. And so I think there's a powerful component to that to show and to prove that this is real.
You make a great point. And, America's most powerful regime in human history, the only ones that top it or compete with it are ancient Rome. And the best way that I have found to explain this to people is imagine if Nero had a son. He didn't. But imagine if he did, and he forgot a laptop at a Roman repair shop. That is the analogy I use. And I use it because what you think of as degenerate it doesn't touch this. So what do you do when you have that type of primary source material? If I tell you this, Robert, if I tell this to a normal person on the street, they won't believe it.
Right.
So what we did and what our book does is it doesn't rely on Garrett's word or a C3's word. It shows you the screenshots. So one of the most incredible things, and none of this would have happened without JP's courage, is we have the source data. So when I say that Hunter violated 18 USC section 1952 BI1, I don't say he did this on October 1st, 2018 in Malibu. No, we go and show readers the actual pictures and Wells Fargo receipts. So we're not telling anybody. And if a leftist is listening to this, Robert, we're not telling them to believe me. They may think, hey, this guy worked for Trump. He's obviously a right-wing person. He's an ogre. I hate him. That's fine. Our goal is to make people wrestle with the actual content. If you look at the book and say, that's forged, you have an unrealistic view of what the Russian security services can produce digitally.
Right.
They cannot fake this level. It's about 200 gigabytes. Half of that is homemade pornography. Another 35 gigabytes is the 128,000 emails. And so what makes our book different, and I think that Miranda and JP's books are fascinating. Everybody should go get them. But what makes our dossier different is we put the pictures and emails in the book itself. So no matter what happens, even if they go to the domain registrar and have bidenreport.com removed, you can go and get this in physical format. So, I love history, and think of this as sort of a time capsule that people can open up in 1 year, 10 years, 15 years and see this is what they were protecting Hunter from. And just thank God, we thank the Lord that the shop owner wasn't a left-wing stooge. And because if it was, this would have been buried. One thing we also do, and JP didn't mention his last name, and that's fine, but I will. Mike Zelak, that FBI agent, would have been lost to history. He's the one who I will describe it as tacitly threatened the shop owner. We put out all these people's information because they work for us. They work for you and me. We pay for these people's healthcare. Every time Zelak's kids go to the dentist, you and I are paying for it. I'm not calling for Zelak to be hung. I'm saying, though, that his actions and words in dereliction of duty have to be exposed for history. This is one of the most insane stories of the century, Robert. And now, going forward, this idea of foreign involvement in cases and in scandals, that has to be nipped in the bud, because JP mentioned going to the Congress, and some of the Republican members were very cautious to even meet with him because they thought it was, the Russians were behind it or foreign actors were behind it. That was sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy of the Washington Compost and all these left-wing media outlets to make people suspicious of anything. Once they saw, you don't even have to be a digital forensics analyst, and we have 2 of those on the team. You don't have to be that to recognize this as legitimate. Once you see the different file types, and we're resurrecting our photo database. Robert, we not only put the email database out there, but we put the photo database out there, BidenLaptopMedia.com, and we're resurrecting that to include all the videos. And of course, genitalia is going to be redacted. Hey, guess what? Hunter sued me and the nonprofit for modification of his data. And the only thing that they said we modified was putting redaction boxes over his genitalia. So according to his own attorneys, Robert, they would have preferred their client be naked in our book. Well, we're Christians, so we don't distribute pornography. So we covered his genitalia with boxes, but they said that was data modification. That's the level of desperation that Abby Lowell, who's still lying for $1,500 an hour, would go to cover this up.
And what is he doing now? As you mentioned, you've been covering this for a long time, and you mentioned Sean Ryan and all these other interviews. Is this a PR campaign to try to paper over and kind of bury some of this evidence?
Well, the country is largely moved on to other topics, but I'm very much in the thick of this because I'm still in litigation with Hunter. The case with JP stopped at the Delaware Supreme Court, but I'm in litigation in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And so that case, and I'm going to answer your question by veering off just a little bit to talk about the arguments of what Lowell is putting forward. But Lowell essentially forum shopped to the most liberal, besides the SDNY and the DC Circuit, and maybe the EDNY, the Central District of California is perhaps the most left-wing federal judicial district in the country. They sued me there, even though I reside in the middle of Illinois, in the middle of cornfields. So he forum shopped. And then once Hunter's patron, Kevin Morris, pushed back and dried up a little bit, just a little bit, because Joe was no longer in office, he tried to dismiss it without prejudice. And of course, we got to dismiss with prejudice, but we're appealing that dismissal because we want our attorney's fees reimbursed. We're not going to let, if we have anything to do with it, we're not going to let this bastard just call the mulligan and walk away. So Lowell has faced 0 bar repercussions. Hopefully we change that. But he's still representing the worst people in the United States. He just made an appearance last week in Minnesota. I watch your show religiously. The show you did on Don Lemon, he's representing Don Lemon. And he's in there as co-counsel in many cases with one of the most demonic men in the United States, Norm Eisen. So Norm Eisen and Abby Lowell are together now. And Abby Lowell was the legal mafia hitman for this story. Abby Lowell has to be in this documentary because what he did was worse than anything he did with the Clintons in the 90s, right? Because they had, for the amount of lying, Robert, that was put forward by Hunter's counsel of record in legal documents can't stand. And if they're going to disbar in California the president's attorney, then they have to look at Abby Lowell. And I hope that this documentary goes into that a little bit about the machinery behind it, right? Because our theory is not that Hunter is stupid, and it's not that he's a genius. Hunter was just smart enough to know how to grift, but all these other forces on the periphery protected him. The Winston Strauns of the world, the Kevin Morrises of the world. That FOIA request, Robert, is still out. We still don't know the CIA's connections to Morris. The FOIA has not been returned yet. There's an active lawsuit between Judicial Watch and the CIA about Kevin Morris, who, and I understand the whistleblowers are going to be a big part of this documentary. The IRS whistleblowers, this isn't my words, testified under oath that they were told by DOJ attorneys Daley and Morgan that Kevin Morris was not to be interviewed. That's what the DOJ told the IRS, that the CIA was protecting Kevin Morris. So this story could have a direct or indirect connection to the CIA. And we'd be naive not to believe it could.
Yeah, and you've had to defend yourself as part of the Biden onslaught. You said hundreds of thousands of dollars. The Ninth Circuit is still pending. Has the rest of the litigation kind of simmered down?
No, we had a hearing last month in the LA Superior Court with Kevin Morris, who also wants to dismiss his suit. And we're only agreeing to the dismissal if he reimburses us. So, again, we're not litigious people. I hate litigation. Okay, I really do hate it. When we're not asking for damages, we're not asking for above and beyond the harm that he wrought. All we're asking for is reimbursement. So my thanks, personally, what's really helped me is a nationwide group of patrons and an attorney, Jennifer Holliday out of California, who's just been phenomenal, who's helped us secure these ridiculous dismissals with prejudice, and who's fighting for us now in the Supreme Court. We're going to be filing a Supreme Court petition. And because the California courts are out of control. Once a LA County Superior Court judge gets in, Robert, they don't even have an election. The way the state court election system works in California is if you don't have somebody get 50% of the vote to challenge you, the primary is the general. So you have these very, very corrupt Superior Court judges. We have Epstein and Elaine Mandel, two horrible people. The judge in our case, the first judge in our case, Robert, her husband pleaded guilty to a federal crime in the LA water and power scandal. These are high-level crooks, very, very sophisticated swindlers. And we're put in those court systems. It's basically second world. That's how I describe it. For our listeners at home, the LA court system specifically, it's second world. And if we don't, that's why we did the SCOTUS petition. Maybe they'll grant our cert. They probably won't, but we have to have it on the record how these courts are second world. So we're still fighting Morris. And I hope to come on your program again and talk about some good news, hopefully, that we got reimbursed and that our foundation can be funded for the next couple of years based on that reimbursement.
And briefly, can you also tell people where to go find some of these key materials? I know you have a couple of websites and you're continuing to report on this. Where can they go to connect with that so they can see these materials raw? Because what we like to do on our channel is to show the documents, right? So people can see it for themselves. And I think that's important in this case, if they have the stomach for it.
I think it's the most important. That's why I was enthralled. I met you almost 4 years ago to the day because we got a SAR leaked. This is what really made him mad at me, okay? It wasn't just the book and the email database. We had somebody within JP Morgan's anti-money laundering division give us 5 suspicious activity reports about the Bidens. You can view those SARs in their unredacted format. And the great thing about Marco Polo is, unlike the Epstein files, they're not redacted. The only things we redact are genitalia and social security numbers and credit card numbers. Everything else is out there. So if you want to, in fact, one of our most voracious readers called up these people themselves. You want to ask the people in the laptop why they did what they did? We're not hiding anything from you. We don't urge you to do anything illegal. We just we put it out there. So a single URL can help your listeners find everything. If they go to bidenreport.com, they can follow that, look at the free ebook, look at the emails, look at the SARs. Very simple, $7 domain name, bidenreport.com.
Amazing. And you're in the documentary. You're helping to connect the jigsaw puzzles of this entire scandal. Garrett?
Yes, I'm the resident PI that I'm not in, I'm not as polished in front of the camera, but I can, I've worked with the shop owner's uncle, who's a phenomenal veteran of the Air Force, Ron Scott. And all I've done is bounce questions off them, right? I came at this completely third party and I couldn't believe what I was finding. So I would just constantly pepper questions. When did they go to Albuquerque? What's the name of the FBI agent? One of the things I like about your program is it doesn't just do the primary source materials, which are key and are necessary. It's that you like the 5 W's. Every sound investigator has the 5 W's and 1 H. Where, what, who, when, why, and how. And that's what we do. 5 W's plus 1 H. If you have those 6 things, the story is told. But if you don't have those 6 things, the beat is still active. So we're still working on this story. Hunter's still trying to protect his dad's legacy. They're still trying to raise money for a presidential library. Of course, we sent our book to every single member on the board. But as long as they're trying to raise money for the library, Robert, we'll be out here. We're going to be putting stickers. We have BLM stickers, Biden Laptop Matters stickers on the stalls at the Biden Presidential Library. John Morgan, a Democratic donor, said their best bet is to just have a bookmobile. Have Joe drive the bookmobile around the country. I know this is funny and tongue-in-cheek, but I don't even think they'll be able to raise 20 mil for the Presidential Library. Hilarious.
They're struggling. Garrett, we really appreciate all your work on this. Thank you for taking the time to join us tonight. We'll see you in the documentary.
It's been a joy. God bless you.
God bless. Friends, next, we've spent this evening talking about the FBI, the IRS. We've heard some from amazing people who've blown the whistle on this whole thing. Of course, there's a cover-up all over the place. But how did the federal government actually get the biggest tech monopolies in the world to pull the plug on the Hunter Biden laptop? Our next guest has the exact blueprint, talks about it all the time. Mike Benz is a former State Department official and the executive director of the Foundation for Freedom Online, the leading expert exposing the censorship industrial complex, the dark alliance between the federal government, NGOs, social media, all designed to silence us, the American public. Mike Benz, welcome.
Hey, great to finally meet you, Robert.
You too, man. I really appreciate you joining us, and I am such a fan of your work, so it's great to connect finally. Can you give us a breakdown on this story? Obviously, the censorship industrial complex is something you talk about all the time. We know that the FBI was going around and trying to suppress this story before it even occurred. How did that happen?
Well, the FBI had the laptop about a year before the break. And what happened was somehow it got to the Aspen Institute. The Aspen Institute has this kind of social media censorship focused subgroup called Aspen Digital. And Aspen Digital, 1 month before the New York Post published the story, ran this incredible, basically pre-censorship simulation where they got about 40 people in the room, including all of the trust and safety representatives at a senior level from all of the major platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube. They also got a bunch of national security officials, both current and former, and effectively wargamed how to stop the circulation of a hypothetical leak of a Hunter Biden story involving a Ukrainian gas company. and how to all coordinate on calling that Russian disinformation so that the Trump campaign could not use it as an October surprise before the 2020 election. So obviously the FBI leaked it to folks at the Aspen Institute, who then quickly organized a tabletop exercise to be able to coordinate killing the story before it could impact the election.
And the Aspen Institute, is that an NGO? Is that contracted with the federal government? How does an organization like that have so much kind of sway where they can literally persuade people to not believe the story?
Well, it's basically a longtime CIA conduit. It receives about, I believe, a third of its funding from the U.S. federal government. And so, as a government-funded, non-governmental organization, it's that classic sort of vector for our government to be able to influence basically countries, movements, regulators, oligarchs abroad. The Aspen Institute is all over the world. It gets its funding through the State Department and USAID to influence affairs in foreign countries by convening events, summits, seminars, forum discussions to sort of get everyone in the room on the same page, to get them to send more war funding to Ukraine, to get them to adopt a sanctions policy against a target country, to get them on board a security deal or a trade agreement. But in this case, they convened it at home to stop basically our own election from being carried out fairly.
Yeah, and specifically, I think the FBI was also meeting with Facebook officials, and I think I remember reading about one call where an FBI agent may have been confirming that there was some there, and then somebody else shut him up, and so it's kind of an internal silencing that's happening.
Well, certainly, Mark Zuckerberg on the Joe Rogan show actually said that the FBI would call and effectively curse out the trust and safety team at Facebook if they didn't take posts down, including memes about COVID-19. So, I mean, this was a long time coming. The FBI basically tried to get jurisdiction over that through the Russiagate idea, the idea that Russia was interfering on social media, and this was no longer First Amendment protected free speech. This was suddenly a counterintelligence threat that allowed the FBI, the CIA, the State Department, the ODNI to get in the business of censoring tweets. Of course, basically, they argued that even though the speech did not come from Russians and was not inauthentic in the form of a bot, if an American said it, Russians could amplify it. And so therefore, basically anything you say that's not maximal blob is effectively doing the bidding of Putin and contributing to a Russian disinformation campaign. This is how you have virtually none of the 51 spies who lied to this day ever apologize or recant what they said, because when they said it's Russian disinformation, they use this cute little linguistic trick to say that even though we didn't mean that the Russians produced the laptop, what we meant is that the Russians amplify it. And so if you tweet about it, you're adding fuel to a Russian fire. And it's this kind of BS that basically went unchecked for pretty much the first 4 years of the Trump administration during term one.
How can they get away with that? They're censoring Americans. We read I think Elvis Chan was the FBI agent's name, who was literally sending emails over to Facebook and Twitter and all these companies, identifying people by their account and by the tweet saying, this is bad, nix this, nix that. So before the event happens, before the disclosure pops, they're censoring people. And then after the event happens, then you get former CIA officials in the 51 laptop letter kind of capturing it on both ends.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, they got away with it because, unfortunately, the Trump administration did not want to believe it was happening until it happened to them personally, until it happened to the president himself. I think most folks in the White House simply refused to listen to it because at the time in 2020, they were campaigning on the price of the NASDAQ and the Dow, and the fastest rising stocks were Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Amazon. And so you would have them going out there saying MAGA equals Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Amazon. And it seemed like too big of a fight to go after tech censorship. And frankly, the first 2.5 years, the administration was completely hamstrung by the Russiagate investigation itself, which forced the administration to be beholden to the Mitch McConnell's and the kind of neoconservative wing of the party, and they all wanted maximalist anti-Russia stuff. So they didn't mind the FBI going hard on Trump or Trump's base and calling them Russian bots and trolls. That all justified more war funding to Ukraine. So it's a nasty soup, and we're still living with a significant amount of it. The fact is, the president has, right now you've got an in-process Senate race where you've got Lindsey Graham versus Paul Dans, and the president has endorsed Lindsey Graham. The fact is, I think that says something about some of the decision making that's happening within the higher levels of the Republican Party. We just had a vote on funding for the National Endowment for Democracy, which was probably and remains to this day the single number one worst and most destructive actor in the entire censorship industrial complex. 100% of Democrats voted to give it its biggest budget ever, and a third of the Republican Party joined that vote. 81 Republicans joined that vote. So I fully expected this, and this is because, as bad as the National Endowment for Democracy may be, this CIA cutout that basically gets Trump-aligned government censored all over the world, it was literally created by the CIA. It was the William Casey's idea, the CIA director in the 1980s, the guy who put it together at the White House level under Project Democracy, was a guy who had just run the CIA's foreign media propaganda arm for 12 years before that. The CIA director personally intervened on the Senate in 1984 to keep it being funded. Its founders all told the New York Times that they exist to fund groups that the CIA wants to fund, but doesn't feel like it can do without triggering some sort of potential backlash if it ever came out for operational security purposes. And so the fact is the National Endowment for Democracy does what's considered to be critically important CIA type work in Ukraine, in Venezuela, in Iran, and in China. And so if you try to kneecap it because it's killing Trump movements in Spain, in Italy, in the UK, in Brazil, even in the United States, well, if you take it out in Spain, you take it out in Ukraine. So they basically make the argument that you can't touch this because even though it's killing the president, we have something that's, and I mean that metaphorically, obviously, it's doing mission critical work for the blob, and they don't really care whether or not this presidency or this movement lives or dies. If Trump is effectively neutralized and a Nikki Haley can rise to power, that's actually better for them.
Yeah, and I'm always trying to understand, when it's domestic, how they can justify it. Is it, institutional bias, like the institutions are protecting themselves against antibodies that are out there? Is it just simple partisanship, or is it intentional? Is it by design trying to create control?
I would argue it's about half and half, in the sense that you have a lot of folks don't know and have believed that some of these institutions are golden boys that can't be touched because they served an important purpose during the Cold War and have a very long history. Much of that pro-Republican, for example, the National Endowment for Democracy, was created by a Republican presidency in the 1980s to fight the Cold War, as was things like the U.S. Institute of Peace and Freedom House and the like. So a lot of them simply don't know because these blob shops don't advertise themselves in terms of, they don't publicly declare a jihad on the Republican Party. In fact, they very specifically go after only the MAGA wing of it. Many of them would gladly vote for a John McCain or a Mitt Romney or Nikki Haley. And many of these factions from those associated groups teamed up and still team up with the National Endowment for Democracy to go after MAGA-aligned movements that might not be best for their corporate sponsors' bottom lines under a nationalist posture, whether that's on things like tariffs, NATO policy, foreign trade agreements. So it's a very nasty soup, and it's not really until you get a MAGA-aligned supermajority in Congress that can withstand internationalist Republicans defecting to the Democrats that you'll really be able to overcome that, our constitutional checks and balances that basically are wonderful that we have them. At the same time, it's worth noting, simply as a descriptive matter, that this is at the heart and soul of what allows basically the blob wing of the Republicans to team up with Democrats so that effectively the presidency can be neutralized unless critical concessions are given to that wing of the Republican Party.
Do you think that the new Trump administration has successfully cut back on some of this? And we know they defunded USAID, which I think was feeding a lot of these NGOs. And from our perspective, it feels like there's very little repercussions for the people who were involved in this entire setup. The 51 individuals on that laptop letter, right? No accountability for them. It's just kind of an opinion that they share. And then they just continue on as though nothing ever happened. So, and they have a flywheel, right? You do something for this deep state, then you go get a job at MSNBC, or you go get a job at a big law firm, or the National Endowment for Democracy, or one of these organizations. Are we seeing any whittling back of this network?
I think everyone's frustrated by that. The fact is, Douglas Mackey was thrown in jail basically immediately at the start of the Biden administration for a simple meme that he made about elections that the Justice Department argued misled people. And then you have basically 51 folks from the CIA and the U.S. military deliberately trying to do that on the other side, and there's no repercussions for that. But the fact is, I do think that a significant amount of reforms were implemented in the first 4 months of this administration, while you had the Elon Musk influence over the cabinet, and Doge was able to effectively wield direct White House power at the agencies to be able to cut budgets and get personnel terminated who didn't follow the chain of command that the agencies are all supposed to be beholden to. I think when Elon departed and there was that tension that persisted for a long time, that reform agenda hit the brakes on the train pretty fast. And while there have been wins in the past, 10 months since then, they've slowed in speed, and they have also been dramatically less in scope. So the grand ambitions that characterized the first 4 months of the admin I'd say that they are not currently as nearly as grand as they were or as they should be. And I'm hoping that the upcoming 2026 midterms inspire folks within the White House and within the agencies to remind them that time is short, and what you do now echoes in eternity. So make it count.
Is there something specific about the Trump administration that caused a lot of this reaction from these people, that was a specific threat that they thought maybe would be coming from his power?
NATO, Eurasia. I mean, a lot of this comes down to the fact that we fought the entire Cold War to seize the $75 trillion in Russia and to turn Eastern Europe into vassal states and to be able to have total control over things like the Caspian Sea and all of the resources that, this goes back to the, Mackinder doctrine around Eurasia as the master island. There's an just incredible amount of corporate and hedge fund and investment bank investments in skating towards where the puck was going, which was NATO and the EU continuing to expand ever eastward, and pre-investments made in all the infrastructure and resource extraction. And that was an agenda that was already on very sensitive footing after the 2014 semi-failed coup in Ukraine. It was certainly successful in ousting Yanukovych, the democratically elected president at that time. Of course, John McCain and Chris Murphy and everyone flew over on USA dime to make that revolution happen. It was funded to the tune of $5 billion by USAID itself. But when the counter coup happened and the eastern half of Ukraine broke away and Crimea voted to join the Russian Federation in a democratic referendum, that caused basically tens of billions of dollars of investment to potentially be zeroed out if there was not an effective war to retake those territories and continue pushing east. Trump said on this 2016 campaign trail that NATO was basically obsolete, that Russia at that time was not the big boogeyman that Hillary Clinton was making it out to be. He argued that we should be friends with Russia. Obviously he was impeached over even suggesting the possibility of not giving war funding to Ukraine. This is 3 years before there was even a war in Ukraine. Of course, there was a war at that time. There had been a war since the moment Crimea voted in the referendum and the moment that the eastern half broke away. Except it was a war on them. We were funding the Kiev military to retake the portions of the east that were under these breakaway republics. We had this incredible situation from 2014 to 2022 when we were taking taxpayer dollars from truck drivers making $50K in the United States, funding the Kiev military to fight fellow Ukrainians east of the Dnieper River, and then funding, after they killed the Ukrainians with our tax money, we would fund their civil affairs and their engineering teams to build oil rigs for British gas companies. I mean, you had this situation where we were just, the whole thing is so far removed from American interests.
Right.
And it resulted in, and I don't think Trump really knew what he was up against when he made those declarations, that he was not just fighting a kind of hegemonic oligarch structure within the United States, but really 100 years of both overt and covert intelligence history of what the Cold War was even about.
Yeah, and that makes sense because Hunter was then on Burisma, the board over there, right in the smack dab of Ukraine, right? We're in the epicenter of a lot of what you're talking about. Do you think that he was an extension of the CIA, or was that coincidence?
Yeah, 100%. Who was right next to him on the board at Burisma? Cofer Black. Cofer Black spent 30 years at the CIA. He won the CIA Distinguished Medal Award. He was actually the guy who led the CIA's entire post 9/11 effort. And what was he said to be recruited to the board of Burisma to do? Corporate development and the like. I mean, this is Hunter Biden personally pitched the Burisma as a vehicle to de-Russify Ukrainian energy. The whole play was to cripple Russia's economy, and because Ukraine sits on the third largest endogenous gas supplies in Europe, they were largely undeveloped. Burisma was a way to develop those, to cut them off from Russian gas, and have basically Western stakeholders take home all the profits that Russia used to make. And he literally pitched Burisma to the State Department that way. He petitioned the U.S. ambassador in Rome to make sure that Mediterranean resources that could be extracted in basically offshore drills were given to Burisma. You had the fact that Burisma was literally funded by USAID, which is a constant CIA conduit for funding. Any long-term CIA project becomes USAID de facto. You can't really keep a covert operation going for years on end, especially when it involves hundreds or thousands of people. You simply can't logistically coordinate that through giving everyone a security clearance and putting everyone in a skiff and risking the operation going public if a single person leaks and then it becomes scandalized. So you simply organize it as USAID for long-term funding if it involves a big enough amount of money or a significant enough amount of people that you simply can't logistically operationalize it directly through CIA. And ask yourself, what's the philanthropic purpose of funding a private Ukrainian gas company? Riddle me that. But the fact is Hunter Biden was also on the chairman's advisory board of NDI, which is the DNC branch of the CIA created National Endowment for Democracy itself.
There are so many layers to these stories, and you know them better than anyone else. You're in this documentary helping to piece these things together. What is the solution? Is it sunlight is the best disinfectant? We just keep talking about these things and expose how the actual machinery works?
Sunlight, it has to start with sunlight. The fact is the National Endowment for Democracy has blown through its statutory obligation to make its grants public. In 2021, the Biden State Department cut this secret deal with the National Endowment for Democracy to allow it in total disregard of the plain letters of the statute that authorized the creation of the National Endowment for Democracy. It authorized a blanket sensitivity over every single NED grant, so you can't know the names of any of the grantees. So this is a $315 million blank check to spend however they want, and the American people can't even see the organizations they're funding. So you get these outrageous situations where it turns out they were funding groups like the Global Disinformation Index, which tried to nuke the advertising revenue of Daily Wire and the Federalist and dozens of American news outlets, basically being paid by the CIA to do it. Through the cloak of a CIA created NGO. But what's the difference between an NGO created by the CIA and the CIA itself if there's no transparency about what the NGO is spending its money on? The whole thing, frankly, if you were to publish the grantee list, would probably get its senior executives arrested in dozens of different countries where they may be non-compliant with different FARA type laws about sources of foreign funding, which is one of the reasons the organization and its sister entities oppose those so much. But it starts with transparency, and really there has to be a deep look on the inside of this administration about whether to yield to frankly what appears to me to be a kind of CIA pressure to keep these institutions in the dark because they're useful for critical ongoing operations, rather than being brought into the light, put through reforms. And if those operations need to be restructured, or if they are deemed essential to national security, simply recruit other institutions or create new institutions to take those on, and let the reform process happen. Because if that does not, there's going to be voter disenchantment. There's not going to be a chance in the 2026 midterms or in the 2028 presidency, because disenchanted MAGA voters will feel like it doesn't matter. They're not going to vote Democrat, but they may decide not to vote for Trump or Trump's successor, or Trump-aligned folks in Congress who do mean well, simply because they think that the movement itself is captured in some respect or non-responsive. I think there was the miscalculation about the Epstein files that I frankly think, unfortunately, is likely to have a demobilizing impact with MAGA voters who love the MAGA movement and who love the president. But if those disclosures had been made a year ago voluntarily, rather than 14 months into this administration, only because Thomas Massie had floated this bill that was passed overwhelmingly because no one wanted to be on the other side of it. But even Thomas Massie is now being rejected by party leadership and primaried, and the president going after his wife and things like this. And so I think that the answer to all these things has to be mass transparency. And if it's not, people will notice, and that the consequences of that are inescapable.
Yeah, and I think they are. It's hard to get excited about self-governance or voting or your country, democracy, democratic republic, if you're not actually running things, and other people are. And Mike, you do the best job of anybody I've ever met, deconstructing the layers on these things. And so hopefully people are following you. And then, of course, checking out the documentary to get the inside scoop about how this all connects. Mike Benz, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Friends, that was amazing, but we're not done yet. Now we're bringing on the man behind the film. We're going to watch the trailer and learn more about how this all came together. We've got the filmmaker himself, Christopher Dodge, joining us now. Mute.
Now, thanks for having me on.
Got it, Christopher. So you've been spending a lot of time on this. You've been distilling all of this information from all of the people that we just heard from today, combining it into this new gripping documentary. It's a massive undertaking. Give us an update. Where are we at in the process? What's happening next? How can people help and get involved to help share this truth?
Yeah. It's been a huge process. First, it starts with research. So, there's all these incredible books written on the topic that I've had to read through. This project came about because Empower Oversight, the nonprofit that helps whistleblowers protect, helps the whistleblowers come forward with legal protections. They approached me after we finished our first film, which was about the SEC's war on crypto. And they were instrumental in filing a number of FOIA requests. And we actually connected the SEC's actions with crypto all the way back to Chinese intentions. And we looked at how the Chinese, businesses were sort of infiltrating into American Wall Street maneuvers through the SEC. So when I met Tristan and Jason, they were like, we got this story and it's pretty big and we want to do something with it. And at the time, I had no idea that it was the Hunter Biden laptop story, specifically the story of Joe Ziegler and Gary Shapley coming forward in the IRS, which is an absolutely amazing story. So we started the process of gathering all the information, watching the grand jury testimony, watching all the different, public interviews that these guys have given. And then ultimately that culminates with them writing a book. And that book, if you don't know the title of it, is called Whistleblowers versus the Big Guy. That is the perspective of Gary and Joe from inside the IRS. And so basically we then started connecting the dots. Okay, so what is Gary and Joe's story? So who didn't we have here tonight? Some of the voices that we have in this documentary are absolutely incredible. I interviewed or got the opportunity to interview Mr. Jim Jordan and James Comer. We interviewed Jason Smith, who is the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. He was the one who actually got the documents and provided clarity so that Joe and Gary could come from a Congress, which then they went and testified in front of James Comer's House Oversight Committee. Once the Republicans had the majority in the second half of Biden's term, they had subpoena power so they could pull documents. And you start seeing how all these things connect together because you start to look at the suspicious activity reports and you're like, oh, well, where did those come from? Those came from an organization called BHR, which Devin was part of. And then we got the opportunity to speak with Devin. I also interviewed Senator Chuck Grassley for the interview or for the documentary. Chuck Grassley, if you're not familiar with him, senator from Iowa, very important in passing whistleblower protections. And without whistleblowers, we can't hold the government accountable. It's because these people are coming forward that we can hold the government accountable for these actions. So incredible story, lots of facets from obstruction of justice in the DOJ to the FBI overtly lying with the 51, the letter of the dirty 51, as Miranda calls it in her book. And then we also have the issue of coordinated efforts to suppress the media. And I think that's the biggest problem. And I think that's everything of why we exist outside of that media. All the stories that I've decided to take on, that I've produced with my wife and I, we co-produce all of our documentaries together, have been stories that we felt like no one else in Hollywood is gonna touch. They're not gonna touch this. And I can tell you already, because I spent the last year working on this film, that Hollywood is not interested. No surprise. We're working on ways to, get them interested. And our goal really is to reach as many people as possible. And like Garrett Ziegler said on this stream, to debate the facts, not debate, what Fox News says or anything in terms of sensationalism. These are facts that are compartmentalized in a way that in a story mechanism, a documentary, or if we're blessed to have the resources to do a docu-series, that we want to share with everybody. So that was a long way to answer your question, but let me give it a very concise answer now at the end. We've shot majority of the interviews. Like I mentioned, all of those individuals, Joe and Gary, Tristan and Jason from Empower, Jim Jordan, James Comer, Jason Smith, Chuck Grassley, Miranda Devine, John Solomon, Mike Benz, an incredible lineup of people with Garrett Ziegler, the PI detective, and John Paul Mac Isaac. And I'll soon be interviewing Bob Costello, who is the attorney for Rudy Giuliani, who took the laptop, brought it to the media. So I was very important to me to have that chain of custody from the computer repair store up into the public. But it also should be noted that all of that data was already validated by the FBI before it ever went public. And they went out and they lied overtly to the American people. And the stat that sits at the end of Miranda's book the first book, which this book right here, Laptop from Hell. The stat that sits at the end of that book is very jarring to me, and that is that over 50% of Biden voters in the 2020 election had no idea about the laptop. They knew nothing, right? And that's a problem. And that's a problem because we have a midterm coming up. We have an election coming up, an election integrity. If we don't have integrity in our democratic process, we do not have a democracy. And so it's important for us to continue to shine light on this and make the story compelling in a way that shows everybody what has gone wrong in all these facets. So what we're going to be doing next is going public. Like we are here. We're announcing the project. We'll show you a trailer in just a moment that I crafted based on the interviews we had done. And I just interviewed last week, by the way, Devin Archer and John Solomon and others. So they're not present in the documentary trailer as it stands today, but they're very much part of the process. And Mike Benz as well. I met him last week. We went out to DC and we interviewed him. So where we're at is we'll be going out to the public, creating an Indiegogo and saying, hey, do you want to see this story? How can we partner with the public basically and crowdfund this project, bring it forward in a compelling light? Maybe we can do a feature documentary and maybe we can do a series, depending on how many people say, yes, I want to participate in helping to tell the story. And then we can worry about getting it, into screenings and different things before the midterms. So our Indiegogo will launch next week and we will raise funds. You can purchase a copy of the film. You can purchase a copy of the book that Joe and Gary wrote together. That book is called Whistleblowers versus the Big Guy. And that is the story, the firsthand account of the two IRS whistleblowers, everything that they went through in the process. And you can participate in one of the screenings that we're going to have across the nation. We'll be bringing this from city to city. We want everybody to see this thing. So we're very excited to bring this out there. And I think it dovetails on a trio of films we've been trying to do about transparency in the government, right? Whether it's looking at the SEC's war in the crypto industry and our documentary that serendipitously just launched today, which is called Money Disrupted, is about the Federal Reserve, the monetary system, and how we've been robbed as Americans from through inflation, and how the big elites control the monetary system and therefore makes it difficult for all of us to get ahead, right? Because they control the financial strings. So this story, Shielded by Power, this documentary that's coming with a forthcoming Indiegogo, this documentary is really important because I think it has everything to do with the integrity of our election system, the integrity of our media, and the ability for us to actually understand what's going on. That is the sort of core, I think, of what's important in this story. And it's why I'm grateful to platforms like yours, Robert, and I'm grateful to everybody in this film. I'm not the film. You're seeing the film through my eyes, but I'm not in the film. The film is about the heroes who came forward, the John Paul Mac Isaacs and the Gary and Joes of the world, and all of the reporters who had done incredible work to expose this story. And I'm just here to package that story in the most compelling way possible. So the funds that we're trying to raise are all about building the film, finishing the documentary interviews, creating visuals so you can have a compelling adventure with all of this stuff, and bringing it all together in a professionally polished package. And I'm very excited to be working on this the next few months until we finish it. Our timeline is basically to run our Indiegogo through the end of March, right through CPAC. And then we will focus on finishing the film in midsummer and try to get it out there by the end of summer or early fall prior to the midterm elections so that people can have a chance to see it. And just be reminded that our election integrity is incredibly important and that we need to have true stories out there. And even if we have to create a new lane in media to do that, we will do so, despite the fact that the standard Hollywood industrial complex has no interest in stories like this.
Yeah, we're grateful for you and your efforts and bringing everybody together here tonight in order to have this conversation, because I think you're right. It is an informational war. And as you mentioned, most people don't even know about this who are on the other side because they're in the media bubble. The media stands up the walls and protects their candidates against real scrutiny. And so we need to go out there and win hearts and minds, right? And win the culture war and make these films that are spreading the truth. So guys like John Paul Mac Isaac are not being buried under the weight of the counterforce. And so we're very excited to see this film. Of course, you've got the website up on the screen. shieldedbypower.com to go learn more. And I think, are we watching the trailer?
Yeah, we're gonna come out and watch the trailer, and then maybe we'll just close it out after that. We want to thank everybody for coming to the stream and watching all these incredible speakers. These are all people in the documentary, so I had the opportunity to meet all these people and interview them and connect the dots together. So I'm incredibly grateful, again, Robert, for hosting this for our documentary Shielded by Power, Indiegogo, launching next week. And with that, I think we should take a look at the project and see what it's all about. So here's a first look ever at the public preview of Shielded by Power.
We choose unity over division. We choose science over fiction. And yes, we choose truth over lies.
Hunter Biden was providing millions of dollars for the benefit of the Biden family through an influence peddling scheme. My name is Gary Shapley. I'm a supervisory special agent of the International Tax and Financial Crimes Group. Hunter Biden's laptop was a smoking gun. It connected Joe Biden to Hunter Biden's businesses.
How many times have you ever spoken to your son about his overseas business dealings?
I've never spoken to my son about his overseas business.
I've never discussed my business or their business, my sons or daughters.
In April of 2014, Hunter Biden joins the board of directors for a Ukrainian oil and gas company called Burisma.
And he didn't have a job until you became vice president. And once you became vice president, he made a fortune in Ukraine, in China, in Moscow,
That is simply
and various
not
other places.
true.
Now you have this person who is being essentially paid for being on the board of directors of this Ukrainian oil and gas company who had no experience, no justification for doing that.
No, I wasn't. I don't. Were you? No.
What he's showing here is evidence that the Biden campaign colluded with big tech to suppress a story that we now know is 100% true.
Quote, Twitter took extraordinary steps to suppress the story, removing links and posting warnings that it may be unsafe.
The FBI came to us and was like, hey, just so you know, like, you should be on high alert. We thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda.
So this was effectively the FBI pre-bunking our story. So it was not difficult for them to pull it offline because they thought they were doing what the FBI wanted them to do.
My name is Joe Ziegler. I'm a special agent for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Hunter Biden committed massive tax crimes. And instead of letting the investigators do their job, I was shut down at every step of the way. Every step of the way.
My son has not made money. It's not true.
The conduct was so egregious, I was forced to make the decision to blow the whistle. The Department of Justice completely handcuffed us. They moved the case to Delaware. The whole purpose of DOJ and Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office was to conceal that, hide that evidence until the election happened.
They were going to the defense counsel and telling them about the search warrant.
They tipped off Hunter Biden that he was going to be interviewed.
Should we ask Rob Walker about 10% held by H for the big guy? And the AUSA at the time goes, no, we're not asking that.
Today, I sit here before you, not as a hero or a victim, but as a whistleblower compelled to disclose the truth.
The cycle of villainizing or canonizing government employees who report what they believe is wrongdoing has to stop.
Joe said, I am a Democrat. I put my career on the line to bring this information forward. I have risked threats to my family.
I knew it was going to be a lot in coming forward, but I knew it was also the right thing to do. They had to see my face. I had to testify in front of this committee.
Both Mr. Shapley and Mr. Ziegler had stellar recommendations. Their reputation for taking on the tough cases, to find out people who weren't paying their taxes, who were doing things wrong, these were the go-to guys. Everything pointed to their credibility. Their story stood up. Their story was true. These are good, honorable people.
The American people saw they were heroes, and they were the best witnesses I've ever had. I don't know how many oversight committee hearings I've attended. There've never been two better witnesses.
Hunter Biden is expected to plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax crimes.
And now we have some of the results. The jury finds Hunter Biden guilty.
Did you witness the president commit a crime? Is it your testimony today?
Yes.
Is there any possibility that the president would end up pardoning his son?
No. Will he pardon his son? No. He said he would not pardon his son.
I will not pardon him.
President Biden is expected to issue a pardon for his son, Hunter.
There's no question that this was a willful act of obstruction. These people should be held accountable.
The only way you overcome the power of government is when there's good patriotic people within the bureaucracy that's willing to come forth and expose the fraud and the cover-up and the political weaponization and put a damper on the power of government.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, so there's a little look at our first look at our documentary, Shielded by Power. It has incredible lineup of people, you know, the most expert people that have ever spoken on this topic. I'm very excited to finish it and to get it out there. And you know, just as that trailer concludes, I just want everyone to know, like, we've tried already to go down the straight and narrow path. I get asked a lot as an independent filmmaker, why isn't this on Netflix? Or, you know, why can't you just put it on HBO? But it's just telling you from the person who's trying to create the materials the highest quality possible and then bring it to those places. There are a lot of gatekeepers, and there are a lot of people who don't want stories like this out there. And I will tell you that I reached out to over 40 different distributors with relationships to these platforms. Everybody who specializes in documentaries, docuseries, you know, you see stuff about P. Diddy or Epstein or whatever on these platforms, and you think, maybe that company would be interested in partnering with us. And not one was interested. Not one. Only a few responded, and the ones that did respond said, and they watched that exact trailer that's been done for transparently almost a year. And they said to us, we don't do social issues type of films. And I look at their platform, I see a lot of social issues on those platforms, but not the ones, they don't do this social issue. So there's the piece of it that we have to be mindful of. There's still media manipulation out there. We'll do everything we can to finish this project with integrity, with quality, with facts. And for us to do that, we need the help of the community. We need the community of listeners and viewers out there to vote with their dollars, basically, to help us out to finish production. You know, this is a small operation. There's not a lot of us involved in making this film. I'm partnered with Empower Oversight, but people should know that Empower Oversight's a nonprofit, and they focus on providing whistleblowers legal protections. And they've done lots of different cases, but they helped Joe and Gary come forward in front of Congress. That's a lot of why we know what we know, in addition to the laptop. And so we want them to continue to, as an organization, be able to operate. So the proceeds of this documentary will ultimately go to them, just like the proceeds of the book actually go to Empower Oversight, the nonprofit, just so you know that they'll be helped on. But there are realities. We have to finish the film and, you know, make sure people who are making projects like this can actually feed their families and you know, operate and create the best product possible. So we'll have our Indiegogo live very soon, and we're excited to show everybody a little bit more behind the curtain. Over the next 7 weeks, we'll be releasing numbers of clips, little sneak peeks of this and that. But transparently, we're still in production. We're still shooting this. We're still making this story. We're still, you know, finishing it out. And without the support of the community, we can't finish it. So we really need the help of everybody there, everybody listening who loves this kind of work. And we'll continue down to do the good fight, you know, to continue to expose these stories and package them up in a way. And I think everybody serves their purpose. Like, there are people who do incredible shows like yours, Robert, on YouTube. There are podcasts out there, but there's also this medium I work in, which is documentary films. And then, you know, there's a medium for that. And people want to see the stories packaged up that way. They love to sit back and watch a series or watch a number of episodes. And it's a really tight and concise way to get the information. And some people will want to go read Garrett's book, and that's great. I mean, but that's not for everyone. It's very dense. It's like a textbook, and sometimes you need to interpret that into a video medium for everybody to understand what's going on. So we're hoping to shed a lot of light with this one. And again, thank you so much for hosting this incredible live stream for us. And we will be providing updates to the community next week and starting to bring out information about it. And you'll be able to go visit the Indiegogo page that we're launching. And we'll share more details as that's available.
Well, we're grateful for your work on this, Christopher. We think that we need to build our own institutions. If the media is not going to accept us in, which they won't, then we have to find an alternative. And you're doing that. We heard all night tonight from people who have been tried to be silenced. They were, trying to basically stop everybody at every turn from getting any of this information out. And so it's no different in this space either, where you're trying to bring some media that explains in a concise manner how this all works. And so these people still exist, right? The Bidens are not in the White House anymore, but the plans, the schemes, all of the individuals who will collude and create efforts to continue, to exact these schemes on all of us, they are still out there. And so we're in an informational war, and we got to push back on it, and you're doing that. So shieldedbypower.com is where you can go to follow along. Of course, thank you to the Empower Oversight guys for bringing the team together of Gary Shapley and Joe Ziegler to blow the lid off the whole thing, and everybody else in the supporting roles, and Moran, everybody who is here tonight. We're very grateful for them. And my friends, of course, thank you for being here as well. We're going to keep our eye on this story, continue to support them, because we've got to win this battle, and we're grateful to have your support in doing that. Chris, anything else?
No, I just want to thank you again for hosting us. And if you'd like to see our other documentary projects, you can visit our website, fruitionproductions.com. That's where we have our documentary that Tristan and Jason are in, which is called Rigged from the Start, exposing the SEC's war on crypto. And also our latest release, which is called Money Disrupted and the Fed, the history of the Federal Reserve monetary system in America, just came out today. And we will have our Indiegogo page launched hopefully in a week, and we'll have everybody out there to support that. So thank you so much for having us, and we're excited to expose the light.
Amazing. Thank you, friends, for joining us. And thank you, Chris, for having me host here today. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
All right, my friends, we'll see you back here on the next one. Make it a great night, and see you soon. Bye-bye.